Hey guys, just want to say thanks for tuning in today. Smash that subscribe button if you're new here, and as always, please like this video if you enjoy the stories. Now, let's get into the stories.
The weirdest first date of my life started out so normal that I almost canceled it. I was sitting in my car outside this little seafood place near the marina, engine off, just watching people walk past under those yellow streetlights that make everything look kind of older than it really is. I remember checking my phone like 5 times thinking about texting some lame excuse and driving home. First dates always feel awkward to me, and this one was with someone I barely knew. We matched online 3 days earlier. Her profile looked simple, a few photos, nothing dramatic. She had this quiet smile, and most of them like someone who laughs a lot but not in public. We messaged a bit, and she seemed nice. Normal hobbies: hiking, movies, late night snacks. Nothing that stood out. Still, something about meeting someone you've never seen in real life always feels strange, like walking into a story that already started without you. I finally got out of the car and went inside. The restaurant was small and kind of old. Wooden floors that creaked a little. Fish tanks near the entrance with lazy crabs sitting in the corners. It smelled like butter and salt and fried stuff, the kind of place where families go on weekends. She was already there sitting in a booth by the window. First thing I noticed was how calm she looked. Not nervous at all. She gave a small wave when she saw me and smiled like we had known each other longer than a few days. Brown hair, tied back, gray hoodie, nothing fancy. The date started exactly how you would expect: food menus, water glasses, that awkward phase where both people are trying to figure out what the other person is like. But there was one small thing. She asked a lot of questions. Not the usual ones either. Not just where I work or what movies I like. They were really specific questions about my routine. At first, it just seemed like curiosity. She wanted to know what time I usually woke up on weekdays. Then she asked how long my drive to work was. Then she asked if I usually made breakfast or skipped it. I remember thinking she was just trying to keep the conversation going. People do that sometimes on dates. They start asking random details when they run out of topics. So I answered normally. I told her I woke up around 7 most days, sometimes 7:15 if I hit snooze too much. I said my drive to work took about 20 minutes unless traffic was bad. I told her I usually made toast or eggs, but sometimes grabbed coffee from the gas station. She nodded a lot while I talked. That was another thing. She nodded like she was confirming something instead of learning it for the first time. After a while, the questions got a little stranger. She asked what day I normally took my trash bins to the curb. I laughed a bit because it seemed random, but I told her Wednesday night since trash trucks come early Thursday morning. Again, she nodded slowly. Then she asked what time I usually got home from work. Then what grocery store I went to. Then if I ever went running in the evenings. I started noticing the pattern halfway through our appetizers. All the questions were about my schedule, not my hobbies or favorite music or anything like that. Just timing, places, routines. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she just liked planning. So people are like that. The marina outside was getting darker while we ate. Boats rocking in the water, lights reflecting across the surface like broken lines. It should have been relaxing. Instead, I started feeling slightly off. Not scared, just confused. Halfway through dinner, something happened that changed the entire night. She reached into her bag. I thought she was grabbing her phone or maybe lip balm or something normal. Instead, she pulled out a small black notebook. Not a big one, about the size of a paperback book. Worn corners, elastic band around it. She set it on the table. For a second, I assumed it was a planner or maybe a sketchbook. Then she slid it toward me. My brain took a few seconds to process what I was seeing when I opened it. Every page had writing, tight handwriting, neat rows, dates, times, notes, and every single entry was about me. The first page started 2 weeks earlier. Monday, 7:12 morning, lights on inside house. 7:34 morning, car leaves driveway. 7:58 morning, coffee at gas station. My chest started feeling tight as I flipped pages. Tuesday, 6:59 morning, lights on. 7:21 morning, trash bag placed in outside bin. 5:48 evening, car returns. There were entire pages filled with this. Day after day. Times I left the house. Times I got home. When I went to the grocery store. When I checked my mail. Even small things. One entry said 8:13 evening. Kitchen light off. I felt cold reading it. Not the kind of cold from outside weather. The kind that crawls into your stomach. 2 full weeks of my life were written down. I looked up at her and she was watching me with that same calm smile. Not excited. Not nervous. Just watching. My brain was racing trying to make sense of it. I flipped to another page. Wednesday night. 10:41 evening. Subject takes trash bin to curb. Exactly what I had told her earlier. I realized something then. She had not been asking questions to learn my routine. She was checking if I would confirm it. Like a test. Another page listed the park near my apartment. Several entries said I walked there around sunset on certain days. I had never mentioned that online. Ever. My hands felt stiff holding the notebook. The pages kept going. Friday afternoon, grocery store visit. Sunday morning, car wash on a corner of Harbor Street. I could even see notes about my apartment building. Which lights turned on. Which windows stayed dark. One entry said subject watching movie in living room 9:17 evening. Blue light flickered through blinds. I did not even know how that was possible. The restaurant noise around us suddenly felt louder. Plates clinking. People laughing. Forks hitting glasses. None of them had any idea what I was looking at. My own life written like surveillance notes. When I got to the final page, it was today. Today had its own list. 4:02 afternoon. Subject leaves apartment. 4:25 afternoon. Arrives marina parking lot. 4:32 afternoon. Enters restaurant. Every movement I made before the date was there, which meant she had followed me here. Sat down before I arrived. And waited. I remember looking around the restaurant then, scanning faces like someone might be watching too. Nobody seemed interested in us. Just normal dinner stuff happening everywhere. When I looked back at the notebook, I noticed something at the bottom of the last page. A blank space. A line ready for the next entry. My brain filled it in without me wanting it to. 8-something evening. Subject learns he has been watched. The worst part was realizing how easily it could have kept going. 2 weeks of notes meant she had been somewhere near my apartment almost every day. Watching. Writing. Tracking. And I never noticed. I closed the notebook slowly. My hands felt sweaty against the cover. She still looked calm. Like none of this was strange. Like showing someone a record of their life was just part of dinner. I suddenly started replaying the past 2 weeks in my head. Walking to my car. Checking my mail. Standing in the kitchen late at night. All those normal moments. And somewhere out there she had been close enough to see the lights turn on. Close enough to write the exact minute. The restaurant felt smaller now. Like the walls had moved in a little. I pushed the notebook back across the table. My brain was stuck between disbelief and a quiet kind of fear that felt very real. Because if she could watch me that easily for 2 weeks without being noticed, there was no reason it had to stop tonight. I kept thinking about the blank space at the bottom of the page. The next line that had not been written yet. And wondering how many more pages the notebook had. I left the restaurant a few minutes later. The marina air outside felt colder than before. I walked to my car and looked around the parking lot twice before getting in. When I drove away, I checked the mirrors every few seconds, half expecting to see headlines behind me. I never looked at the dating app again after that. And for the next month, every time I took the trash out on Wednesday night, I looked up and down the street first. Because once you see your life written down like that, minute by minute, it changes the way every quiet corner feels, especially the ones near your own home. The first thing that felt wrong about that night happened before I even saw him. I was standing outside the restaurant looking at the place through the front window, and I remember thinking it looked too quiet for a Friday night. Not empty exactly, but weirdly calm, like everyone inside was trying not to make noise. It was one of those narrow restaurants squeezed between 2 old buildings downtown. Small sign above the door, warm lights inside, brick walls. The kind of place people describe as cozy when they want to sound fancy. He was the one who suggested. We had matched online earlier that week. His profile seemed normal enough. Decent photos, nothing flashy. A dog in one picture, hiking trail in another. His messages were short but polite. He said he knew a quiet place that made great pasta and asked if I wanted to meet there. Quiet sounded good to me. I hate loud restaurants where you have to lean across the table and yell just to talk, so I said yes without thinking much about it. The street outside the place was busy, cars passing, people walking in groups. But when I pushed the door open and stepped inside, it felt like walking into a different world. The noise dropped instantly. Low music playing somewhere, forks tapping plates, quiet talking at tables. The smell of garlic and butter filled the room. He was already there waiting near the entrance. Tall, dark jacket, relaxed smile. He waved when he saw me and walked over like we had already met before. Everything about him seemed calm, confident in a way that made the whole situation feel easier. Then something small happened that I noticed right away. The hostess looked at him before she looked at me. Not just a normal glance. It was quick but weirdly tense, like she was checking something. Then she forced a smile and grabbed 2 menus quickly, almost too quickly, and led us to a table in the corner. I thought maybe I imagined it. But then the waiter came over. Same thing. The moment he saw the guy I was with, his expression changed for half a second. Not angry, not happy, just nervous. He placed the water glasses down fast and left almost immediately. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was a regular there. Maybe they just knew him. That happens sometimes. The restaurant itself was nice. Dim lights, old wooden beams across the ceiling, little candles on each table. There were only maybe 6 or 7 other groups eating. The whole place felt kind of hidden, like a spot locals knew about but tourists didn't. We started talking. At first, the date was normal. He asked about where I grew up. I told him about my job. He talked about his work a little, what kept it kind of vague. Something in marketing, he said. He laughed easily, leaned forward when I talked, paid attention to everything I said. It actually felt like a good date. But every once in a while I noticed the staff glancing at our table. Not constantly, just enough to feel strange. The hostess walked past twice and looked over quickly both times. The waiter refilled our water glasses, even though they were barely empty. I started wondering if maybe the guy I was with used to work there or something. But then another thing happened. The waiter brought our food and placed the plates down carefully. When he set my plate down, he hesitated for a second. His eyes flicked from me to the guy across the table. Then he walked away fast. Again, I tried ignoring it. The food was actually really good. Creamy pasta, warm bread, stuff like that. We talked about movies for a while, then travel. He told a story about getting lost during a road trip in the desert. Normal date stuff. But there was something else I noticed. He checked his phone a lot. Not in a rude way exactly. Just quick glances every few minutes. Like he was waiting for something. About halfway through dinner, I got up to go to the bathroom. The hallway to the restrooms was narrow and dim. Framed pictures of old city buildings on the wall. The kind of place where you could hear the kitchen clanking dishes behind a door. When I came out a few minutes later, someone was standing there. The manager. I knew he was the manager because he had that slightly more formal look than the other staff. Dark shirt, tie, clipboard in hand. He looked nervous. Really nervous. He stepped a little closer and spoke quietly so nobody in the dining area could hear. What he told me made my brain freeze for a few seconds. He said I was the 3rd woman the guy had brought there that night. Not 3rd this week. 3rd that night. I remember just staring at him. He quickly explained in a rushed whisper. The guy had come in earlier that evening with another woman around 5:30. They sat at the same table, ordered drinks, stayed maybe 30 minutes, then they left. About 40 minutes later, he came back with someone else. Different woman. Same table again. They ordered food that time but left before finishing it. Then about an hour later, he walked in again. With me. The manager said the staff noticed because it was the exact same routine every time. Same table request. Same relaxed attitude like it was normal. He told me they felt weird about it but didn't know what to do. He asked if I knew about the other women. My stomach felt heavy. Obviously I didn't. The weirdest part was realizing how calm the guy had seemed the entire time. Like this wasn't unusual at all. Like dinner dates were something he scheduled back to back. The manager kept glancing toward the dining room like he didn't want the guy to see us talking. He said he just thought I should know. Then he walked away quickly toward the kitchen. I stood there in the hallway for a minute trying to process what I had just heard. 3 women. Same restaurant. Same night. My brain started replaying the evening from the beginning. The hostess looking tense. The waiter acting strange. The quick service. It all made sense now. They had already seen this happen twice before I arrived. When I walked back to the table, the guy was scrolling on his phone again. He smiled when he saw me sit down. Everything about him still looked relaxed, like this was just a normal dinner. For the next few minutes, I watched him more closely. Small details started standing out. His phone lighting up with messages. The way he glanced at the door sometimes. The way he checked the time. Then I noticed something else. When his phone lit up again, I caught a glimpse of the screen before he turned it over. A dating app notification. Another message from someone. Suddenly, the whole night felt fake. Like I had stepped into the middle of some strange schedule he had planned. Maybe there was another woman meeting him after me. Maybe I was just one slot in a list. I started wondering about the other 2 women. Did they know about each other? Did they leave because they figured it out? Or did he end the dates early so he could move on to the next one? The staff kept glancing over again. Now I understood why. They had probably been watching the same cycle repeat all the evening. Same man. New woman. Same corner table. Same calm smile. The rest of the dinner felt long after that. Not scaredy exactly. Just uncomfortable in a weird way. Like being in a situation that suddenly doesn't make sense anymore. When the bill came, he paid quickly without hesitation. We walked outside together into the cool night air. Cars were passing. People laughing down the street. Normal city sounds again. But my brain kept thinking about the manager in the hallway. 3rd woman tonight. The guy stood there talking casually for a minute like nothing was unusual. His phone buzzed again in his hand. I noticed him glance at it quickly, then look back up with the same relaxed expression. I left a few minutes later and walked down the street toward my car. While I was unlocking it, I glanced back once. He was still standing outside the restaurant, looking down at his phone, like he was waiting for someone. Maybe another date walking down the sidewalk. I drove away after that. Later that night, I checked the dating app. His profile was still there, active. And when I looked at the timestamp, it said he had been online just a few minutes earlier, probably setting up the next dinner. The weird part about that date is that it sounded like a good idea at first. Most first dates are the same thing. Coffee shop, dinner, awkward walk somewhere. You sit there trying to think of things to talk about while pretending you are not checking the time every 5 minutes. So when she suggested something different, I actually thought it sounded fun. An escape room. She said it would be better than sitting across a table staring at each other. Something active. Something where we could laugh if we messed up puzzles. It felt less like a date and more like doing something random with someone new. So I agreed. The place was in an old warehouse area near the edge of town. Big brick buildings that used to be factories or storage places, but now had weird businesses inside. Art studios, gaming places, stuff like that. The escape room place had a glowing sign above the door and painted windows with fake chains and lock graphics. I got there about 10 minutes early and waited in the parking lot. The building looked bigger up close than it did online. Tall brick walls, narrow windows near the roof, the kind of place that probably held machines or trucks decades ago. She showed up right on time. First time seeing her in person, and she looked almost exactly like her photos. Dark hair, black jacket, jeans casual. She seemed energetic right away, like someone who likes doing random stuff. She was the one who suggested the escape room, so she walked in first like she already knew how these places worked. Inside it smelled like old wood and cleaning spray. The lobby had a front desk and a couch with posters on the walls showing different themed rooms. Pirate ship, haunted hotel, prison break, that kind of thing. The guy at the front desk checked us in. There were 2 other employees hanging around near the hallway that led to the rooms. Both of them looked bored like nothing interesting ever happened there. They gave us a quick explanation about how the game worked. 1 hour to solve puzzles. Hidden keys. Codes unlocks. Stuff like that. Normal escape room rules. They put us in a room called the safe house. The theme was supposed to be something about finding hidden documents before spies returned. Kind of cheesy, but whatever. The room itself looked cool though. Fake office setup. Desk with drawers. Old radio on a shelf. Filing cabinet. Maps pinned on the wall. A digital timer above the door. When the staff member started the game, the timer counted down from 60 minutes like usual. At first, everything felt normal. We started looking around the room, opening drawers and checking behind picture frames. She seemed really into it, moving fast from one thing to another, checking shelves, flipping books open, scanning the walls. I noticed she was way better at it than me. Within the first 10 minutes, she had already found 2 hidden keys and 1 clue card. The clue card had a puzzle involving a map and some numbers scribbled in red marker. We worked on it together for a bit and unlocked the first small box on the desk. Inside was another key and a folded piece of paper. Pretty standard escape room stuff. The timer dropped to about 45 minutes. Then something slightly strange happened. The speaker in the ceiling usually lets staff give hints during the game if you get stuck. But instead of a hint, there was just a short burst of static. Like someone had turned the microphone on and then off again. We looked up at the speaker for a second, but ignored it. Probably normal equipment glitch. We kept solving puzzles. One clue led to a combination lock on the filing cabinet. Inside the cabinet were more documents and a small locked metal box. Again normal. But then the timer suddenly stopped. I noticed it first because I happened to glance up. The numbers froze at 38 minutes. Then they flickered. For about 2 seconds, the screen went blank. Then the timer restarted. Except it wasn't counting down from 60 anymore. It said 4 hours. 4 hours exactly. The countdown started from 4 o'clock, 00. Both of us stared at it. At first, I actually laughed because it looked like a glitch. Escape rooms do not last 4 hours. But then we waited for a few seconds and nothing changed. The timer kept counting down. 3:59:54. 3:59:53. I walked over to the door and tried the handle. Still locked. That part was normal. Escape rooms always lock the door until the game ends or staff release it. I looked up at the small camera in the corner of the ceiling. Every room has one so staff can watch and help if needed. So I figured someone would notice the timer issue quickly. A minute passed. Nothing happened. The speaker stayed silent. No hint. No explanation. We went back to solving puzzles assuming the staff would fix it soon. But the next clue was where things started getting weird. Inside the small metal box from the cabinet was another folded paper. I opened it expecting another puzzle. Instead, it had a sentence printed on it. The sentence mentioned the street where I live. Not just a street name. The exact block number. My first thought was that it was some weird coincidence. Maybe the escape room story used random street names. But then the next line mentioned the grocery store I go to sometimes. That specific one. The one 2 blocks from my apartment. I remember staring at the paper trying to figure out if it was some trick. Maybe it was referring to the theme somehow. Maybe it was code. But the words were clear. My street. My grocery store. I looked at her thinking she would laugh and say it was part of the puzzle. But she looked confused too. We checked the rest of the room again. Another puzzle box opened after we solved a code hidden in the desk drawer. Inside that one was a photo. A printed photo of my apartment building. Not a generic one. My actual building. Taken from the sidewalk across the street. My brain started racing then. I walked over to the door again and knocked on it. No answer. The hallway outside stayed silent. I looked up at the camera again, wondering if someone was watching. The timer kept counting down. 3:41:12. She started checking the rest of the clues more carefully. Another paper inside a book mentioned the park near my apartment. One line said something about evening walks. That made my stomach feel heavy, because I do walk there sometimes after work. That detail is not on any profile or social media. We stopped solving puzzles at that point. Instead, we started searching the room for something else. Maybe a hidden door. Maybe a phone. Anything. The camera in the corner still stared down at us. I waved at it once, hoping someone would respond. Nothing happened. The clues kept getting more specific. Another envelope hidden behind the map had a printed screenshot. It looked like a social media page. Mine. Not just the profile picture. Old posts, too. Stuff from months ago. Stuff I barely remember posting. She picked up another clue card and flipped it over. On the back was a list of dates. Most of them were random, but a few stood out. One of them was my birthday. Another was the day I moved into my current apartment. I remember thinking about how impossible this felt. Escape rooms are supposed to be fake puzzles with fake stories, not personal details about the players. The timer dropped to 3:10:22. We kept trying the door every few minutes. Still locked. The speaker never turned on again. The hallway outside stayed silent, like the building was empty. The next clue we found was inside the radio on the shelf. A small compartment popped open when we turned a dial. Inside was a folded map. When I opened it, my stomach dropped again. It was a map of my neighborhood. Not the whole city. Just my neighborhood. My building circled in red marker. 3 other places marked with numbers. The grocery store. The park. And the coffee place near the corner where I sometimes stopped before work. I remember looking around the room again, hoping someone would burst in and explain it was a prank or something. But the timer just kept ticking down. 3:02:45. She walked over to the camera and stared directly at it for a long time, like she was trying to force whoever was watching to respond. Nothing happened. I started realizing something then. None of the clues had anything about her. Only me. Every paper. Every photo. Every location. It all pointed back to my life. Not hers. Mine. The last thing we opened that night was a locked drawer under the desk. We found the key taped under the chair leg. Inside the drawer was a single notebook. When I opened it, the first page had my name written at the top. Under it were dozens of lines of notes. Places I go. Times I leave for work. Times I come back home. I stopped reading after the first page. The timer above the door said 2:48:19. We were still locked inside the room, and the clues had only just. The first red flag about that date showed up before the car even stopped moving. Not a huge red flag either, just a small thing that felt a little off at the time, like when you hear a noise in your house at night and you tell yourself it is probably nothing. I almost canceled that date twice that day. I remember sitting on my bed around 6 in the evening staring at my phone thinking about texting him some excuse about being busy. I had only been messaging him for about 4 days, and honestly, I still barely knew anything about him. His profile was normal. Hiking photos, dog pictures, a few jokes in the bio. Nothing that stood out, but the plan he suggested was a little unusual. Instead of meeting somewhere public, he offered to pick me up and drive to a scenic overlook outside town. He said it was a cool spot where you could see the whole valley at night, and there were usually food trucks parked there. It sounded simple enough. I almost said no just because getting into someone's car on a first date always feels like a gamble. But he seemed relaxed in his messages, and we had talked enough that I felt okay giving it a chance. So I agreed. He pulled up in front of my apartment building right on time. Dark gray car. Older model, but clean. The headlights lit up the curb, and I could see him leaning over to unlock the passenger door. When I got in the car, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Not terrible. Just slightly metallic. I thought maybe it was from the air freshener hanging from the mirror or something in the trunk. He greeted me with a friendly smile, and we started driving. The city streets were still busy with evening traffic. People heading home from work, stopping at lights, turning into grocery store parking lots. Normal stuff. He seemed relaxed behind the wheel. One hand on the steering wheel, the other resting on the center console. We talked about normal things during the drive. Where we grew up. What kind of jobs we had. Music we liked. The usual first date conversation that feels a little stiff at first but slowly gets easier. After about 10 minutes, the building started thinning out and the road climbed into the hills outside town. Street lights got farther apart. The air outside the windows looked darker. The overlook he mentioned was apparently about 20 minutes away. The road twisted a lot up there. Long curves through trees and small patches of open land where you could see the city lights way down in the distance. That was when I noticed the dent. It was small but pretty fresh looking, on the passenger side of the hood near the front edge. At first I thought it might just be old damage. Cars get dents all the time. But the metal looked scraped and bright like it had just happened recently. I kept looking at it through the windshield reflection for a minute. Then my eyes moved lower, toward the front bumper. There was something dark along the edge of it. At first I assumed it was mud. Maybe he drove through a dirt road earlier. But the longer I stared at it, the less it looked like mud. It was streaked, and darker near the center. My brain started trying to come up with explanations that made sense. Maybe he hit an animal. That happens a lot on these hill roads. Deer or raccoons run out at night sometimes. I almost asked about it, but decided not to right away. The road kept climbing, and the trees got thicker around us. We passed only 2 other cars in about 10 minutes. Eventually, we reached the overlook. It was basically a wide gravel parking area carved into the side of the hill. Metal guardrail along the edge, and a huge view of the city below. The lights from town looked like scattered stars across the valley. There were only 2 other cars parked there when we arrived. No food trucks like you mentioned. Just a quiet wind moving through the trees. He parked near the edge facing the view. For a minute, everything felt normal again. We both stepped out of the car and leaned against the guardrail looking out at the city lights. It really was a great view. The whole valley spread out below with roads cutting through neighborhoods and little clusters of light from stores and houses. The air was cool up there. We talked for a while about random things. Movies, travel plans, stuff like that. But after a few minutes, my eyes drifted back toward his car. Specifically the front bumper again. In the dim light from the parking area lamp, the dark stain was still visible. And now that I was closer, I could see it more clearly. It was not mud. It had dried in uneven lines across the metal. Some of it was flaked along the edge of the license plate. My stomach felt slightly heavy looking at it. Again, I thought about animals. Maybe he hit a deer earlier that day. But the dent seemed small for something like that. We eventually walked back toward the car and leaned against the hood. He was standing on the driver's side while I stood near the passenger side where the dent was. I kept glancing at it without meaning to. Finally, he noticed. Instead of acting awkward about it, he just looked down at the dent himself for a second. Then he looked back at me. His face still had that relaxed expression, like nothing about the situation was unusual. That was when he asked the strangest question I have ever heard on a first date. He casually asked if I had ever helped someone hide an accident. Not in a joking tone. Not like it was a story he was about to tell. Just a direct question. For a few seconds, my brain did not even react. I thought maybe I misunderstood. But he kept looking at me waiting for an answer. I remember glancing down at the bumper again automatically. The dark stain looked even worse up close. A small smear had dried along the bottom edge near the tire. My mind started running through possibilities really fast. Maybe he meant something harmless. Maybe a small crash with another car and he was worried about insurance. But the way he said it did not sound like that. It sounded like something else. I looked out over the valley lights again, trying to think. The overlook was quiet. The other 2 cars were parked far on the other side of the gravel lot. No one near us. The wind moved through the trees behind the guardrail, making that low rustling sound. He stayed calm the entire time, leaning against the hood like we were still just talking about normal stuff. But that question kept echoing in my head. Hide an accident. I started noticing more small details around the car then. There was a faint scratch running along the edge of the headlight. The license plate frame was slightly bent on one side, and the stain on the bumper looked thicker near the center, like something hit there first. My stomach kept getting heavier the longer I stood there. I also realized something else. The drive up the hill had been pretty fast. He barely slowed on some of those curves, like someone used to driving those roads. Maybe very recently. He eventually pushed himself off the hood and walked around the front of the car. His shoe passed right next to the dried stain. He glanced down at it for half a second and then looked back toward me again, still calm, like he was waiting to see how I would react. I remember suddenly becoming very aware of how isolated that overlook felt. The road up there had long stretches with no houses, just trees and curves. If someone crashed into something up there at night, it would probably take a long time before anyone noticed. The two other cars in the lot started their engines around that time. Their headlights swept across the gravel as they pulled away one after the other. Within a minute, the overlook was empty except for us. Just his car, the guardrail, and the city lights far below. I looked out at the bumper one more time. The stain had a darker patch near the middle that looked almost black in the dim light. That was when I realized I could still smell that metallic scent from earlier. The same one from inside the car. He leaned against the driver door and watched me quietly. Not rushing. Not explaining anything. Just waiting. The road behind us curved down into darkness through the trees. And the dent on the hood looked fresh enough that whatever caused it probably did not happen very long before he picked me up. The moment I realized something was wrong with that date was when the waiter put two drinks on the table, and she slid one toward me without even looking at it. It sounds like a small thing, but that was the first detail that stuck in my head later. At the time, it just felt a little strange. The whole night had started pretty normal before that. I met her online about a week earlier. Nothing unusual about the profile. A few photos, short bio, some jokes about bad cooking skills, and late-night movie marathons. She seemed easygoing from the messages, too. Not overly talkative, but friendly enough that meeting up felt like a good idea. We decided on a diner near the edge of town. Not a fancy place. The kind with bright lights, booths with cracked red seats, and laminated menus that have way too many options on them. Burgers, pancakes, fries, milkshakes, all that stuff. I got there first and grabbed a booth by the window. It was around 8 in the evening, and the place was busy but not packed. Families finishing dinner, a couple of guys watching a small tube over the counter, waiters moving between tables carrying trays. Just a normal night. She walked in about 5 minutes later. First thing I noticed was how confident she looked walking straight toward the booth, like she already knew exactly where I was sitting. Dark jacket, hair tied back, small smile. Nothing about her seemed nervous. Some people look tense on first dates. She looked completely comfortable. We started talking right away. The conversation actually flowed pretty easily at first. We talked about work, music, random stuff about growing up in different towns. She laughed a lot and kept leaning forward on the table like she was really interested in everything I said. But there was one thing that stood out almost immediately. She liked being in control of the conversation. Not in a rude way exactly, just very direct. She asked most of the questions and guided where the topics went. After a few minutes, the waiter came by to take our order. Before I even picked up the menu, she told him what we were having. Not just her food, both of ours. She ordered 2 burgers, fries for the table, and 2 drinks. I remember pausing for a second because it caught me off guard. I had not even looked at the menu yet, but she acted like it was the most normal thing in the world. She smiled at me and said she already knew what was good there. So I just went along with it. Honestly, it did not seem like a big deal at the time. Some people just like making decisions quickly. While we waited for the food, we kept talking. She told stories about random road trips she had taken and a job she used to have at a movie theater years ago. Every story had this weird detail where something slightly strange happened at the end. Not scary stories exactly, just odd situations. Like someone falling asleep in the theater during the middle of the day and staying there until closing. Or someone leaving their phone behind and never coming back for it. I remember thinking she liked telling stories that had uncomfortable endings. The waiter came back with the drinks about 10 minutes later. 2 tall glasses with ice and dark soda inside. He set them on the table and walked away. That was when she slid one toward me. She did it without even looking down. Just pushed it across the table casually. I picked it up and took a sip while she kept talking about one of her old jobs. The drink tasted normal. Just soda and ice. The conversation went on for another few minutes. Then she leaned forward slightly across the table. Her voice got quieter. Not whispering exactly, but close. What she said next completely changed the entire night. She calmly told me not to worry because only one of the drinks had been drugged. Then she said she just wanted to see how I would react. For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. Like it was some dark sense of humor or weird test. But the way she said it did not sound like a joke. Her face stayed completely calm. No smile. No laugh. Just watching me carefully. My brain started racing immediately. I looked down at the glass in my hand, then at the one sitting in front of her. They looked identical. Same soda. Same amount of ice. My heart started beating faster, because I realized something important right away. I had already taken a sip. Only one. But still, the thought that something might be in it made my stomach twist. She kept watching me like she was studying my reaction. Not concerned. Not apologizing. Just curious. Like this was some kind of experiment. I put the glass back on the table slowly. My mind kept replaying the last few minutes. Her ordering both drinks. Sliding one toward me. The first sip. The metallic sound of ice moving in the glass when I set it down. The diner around us still looked completely normal. Waiters moving between tables. People eating burgers. Someone laughing loudly near the counter. None of them had any idea what was happening in our booth. She leaned back in her seat after saying it, still looking at me closely. Like she was waiting for something specific. Panic, maybe. Anger. I honestly did not know what reaction she expected. I kept staring at the two glasses, trying to figure out which one she meant. Then a new thought hit me. What if she was lying? What if both drinks had something in them? Or neither? The way she said it made it impossible to know. The uncertainty was the worst part. I looked at her again, trying to see if she would say something else. But she stayed quiet. Calm. Observing. I started paying attention to small details about her then. The way her hands were folded on the table. The way her eyes kept moving between my face and the drink. She looked interested. Like someone watching a reaction in a science test. My throat suddenly felt dry, even though I had just taken a sip of soda. I pushed the glass a little farther away from me. She noticed that immediately. Her eyes dropped to the movement, then back up to my face. The food arrived a minute later. 2 burgers and a basket of fries placed between us. The waiter had no idea anything was wrong. He set the plates down and walked away like it was any other table. The smell of food filled the booth, but suddenly I had no appetite at all. My brain kept wondering if the sip I took would start doing something. Would I feel dizzy? Tired? Sick? Minutes passed. Nothing happened. My heart kept beating faster, though, because I did not know what to expect. She finally picked up her own drink and took a slow sip while watching me. That made things even worse. Because if her drink was the safe one, then mine was not. But if she was lying, then maybe both were fine. The uncertainty kept building in my head. I looked around the diner again. People were eating and talking like normal. The 2 above the counter showed some sports game with the volume low. Everything looked so ordinary compared to what was happening in our booth. She eventually reached forward and nudged my glass slightly with one finger. Not pushing it toward me exactly, just touching it. Then she leaned back again, still studying my face. I realized then that she was enjoying this. Not in a loud way, but in a quiet, curious way. Like someone watching a puzzle play out. Another minute passed. Still no strange feeling in my body, but my mind would not stop imagining it. I thought about how easily someone could put something into a drink before it reached the table. How quickly it could happen. The waiter bringing it out without knowing. The ice clinking against the glass. I looked at the door of the diner, then back at the table. The 2 glasses sat there side by side. One of them supposedly had something in it. Or maybe neither did. Or maybe both. She stayed completely relaxed the entire time, like this was the most interesting part of the evening. Watching what I would do next. And the worst part was realizing she had planned that moment before the date even started. Before I walked through the diner door. Before the drinks ever touched the table. The strangest part about that date is that everything felt completely normal right up until the moment it didn't. There was no creepy message before it. No weird behavior online. No strange comments during dinner. If anything, he seemed like one of the most normal people I had met from that app, which is probably why the whole thing bothered me so much later. There was nothing to warn me ahead of time. We had been messaging for about 5 days before meeting. His profile looked basic. A couple pictures outside on hiking trails, one photo with a dog, another with a coffee mug and messy hair like he just woke up. The bio was short, something about liking late-night drives and old movies. Nothing dramatic. When we talked, he seemed polite and relaxed. Not overly intense like some people get when they start messaging someone new, just normal conversation. We decided to meet at a small pizza place downtown. Not fancy. The kind with plastic cups and a counter where you order slices. I got there first and grabbed a table near the window. The sun was starting to go down outside and the street lights were turning on one by one. He walked in a few minutes later. Tall guy, hoodie and jeans, friendly smile. The first half of the date actually went great. We shared a pizza, talked about random stuff like bad jobs we had when we were younger and dumb road trips with friends. He laughed easily and didn't seem awkward at all. If someone had asked me halfway through dinner how the date was going, I would have said it was one of the better ones I had been on in a while. After we finished eating, we walked outside and wandered down the street for a bit. The night air felt cool, and the sidewalks were busy with people going between bars and restaurants. At some point, he mentioned that his apartment was only a few blocks away. He said his roommate had been working on some art project and wanted to show it to someone. He made it sound casual, like it would only take a minute. Normally, I might have said no to going to someone's place on a first date, but it sounded harmless. Just a quick stop before heading home. Plus, we had already been walking in that direction. So we went. His building was an older apartment complex tucked between two taller buildings. 3 floors, faded paint, small balconies with plants and chairs on them. Nothing unusual. We walked up a narrow stairwell and down a hallway that smelled faintly like cleaning spray and old carpet. His apartment door was near the end. He unlocked it and pushed it open while stepping inside first. The lights were already on in the living room. The place looked tidy. Small couch against the wall, coffee table in the middle, table on a stand in the corner. There were a few framed pictures on the wall and a shelf with books and random decorations. It looked like any other apartment. He mentioned that his roommate was probably in the living room working on that art thing he talked about. Then he stepped aside slightly and let me walk in. That was when I saw it. At first, my brain did not understand what I was looking at. Someone was standing near the window on the other side of the room. Perfectly still, facing toward us. My first thought was that it was the roommate. But something about the posture looked strange. Too stiff. Too straight. Then my eyes adjusted to the room lighting, and I realized it wasn't a person. It was a mannequin. One of those full-size store mannequins with plastic arms and legs and a blank face. The thing that made my stomach drop was the clothes, because it was dressed exactly like me. Same color jacket, same type of jeans, even the same style sneakers. For a few seconds, I just stood there staring at it, trying to understand what I was seeing. My brain started checking details automatically. The jacket looked almost identical to the one I was wearing. Same shade. Same zipper style. The jeans matched too. The mannequin's hair was a cheap wig, but the color was close enough that it made the whole thing feel even stranger. It looked like a frozen version of me standing across the room. I glanced at him, expecting him to laugh or explain the joke. But he just walked farther into the apartment calmly, like this was completely normal. He moved past the couch and stopped near the coffee table. Meanwhile, I was still standing near the door staring at the mannequin. The longer I looked, the more details I noticed. The jacket on it wasn't just similar. It was the same brand. I knew because the small logo near the collar was identical. The mannequin's arms hung at its sides in that stiff store display position. Its blank plastic face pointed straight toward the door like it had been positioned to watch anyone who walked in. I slowly stepped closer into the room without meaning to. Something about the whole setup felt unreal, like walking into a scene that was halfway finished. The wig on the mannequin had long brown hair just like mine. It wasn't styled exactly the same, but it was close enough to make the resemblance uncomfortable. On the coffee table nearby, there were a few items laid out. Another jacket. A pair of shoes. And something that looked like a small box with clothing tags still attached. That was when I started realizing something even stranger. The mannequin's outfit matched what I was wearing that night. Not just similar clothes. The same combination. Dark jacket. Blue jeans. White sneakers. My brain jumped back to earlier that evening. The first time he saw me was when I walked into the pizza place, which meant the mannequin had already been dressed like that before the date started. He couldn't have changed it after seeing me. The mannequin had been prepared ahead of time. I looked around the apartment again, noticing more details. Near the wall, there was a small clothing rack with a few outfits hanging on it. Different jackets, different shirts. Some of them looked like styles I actually owned, or at least very close to them. The whole living room started feeling less like a normal apartment and more like some kind of setup. He walked over to the mannequin then, still calm. He adjusted the sleeve of the jacket on it slightly, like someone fixing a display in a store window. Then he stepped back and looked at it, and then at me, like he was comparing the two. I felt this heavy, uncomfortable feeling in my stomach while standing there, because the resemblance was too specific to be random. The mannequin was not just wearing similar clothes. It was wearing my outfit, the exact outfit I showed up in, which meant one of two things. Either he had seen me somewhere before that night, or he had guessed what I would wear with ridiculous accuracy. Neither possibility made sense. I noticed something else then. On the side table near the couch, there was a small stack of printed photos. I stepped closer without thinking and looked down. They were pictures of different women. Not the same person in each photo. Different women. Each photo had notes written on the edges. Dates. Locations. Small details about clothing. Some of the notes mentioned jackets and shoes, like someone cataloging outfits. My eyes moved back to the mannequin again. Standing by the window, dressed exactly like me, facing the door, waiting. He stood beside it quietly for a moment before turning his attention back toward me. The apartment suddenly felt smaller than it did when I first walked in. The hallway behind me was still open, the front door only a few steps away, and the mannequin stayed exactly where it was, perfectly still, wearing my clothes before I even arrived. The weird part about that date did not start at the end. It started about 5 minutes in, but at the time it just felt like one of those small awkward things you ignore because you do not want to ruin the night. I remember walking to the place thinking it was going to be normal. Just food, small talk, maybe a walk after. The restaurant was this small burger spot near the river that always smells like fries before you even open the door. It was early evening, still bright outside, people sitting at those metal tables on the pavement. Nothing about the place looked creepy or strange. She was already there when I got there. Sitting at one of the outside tables scrolling on her phone. She looked pretty normal. Brown jacket, light jeans, white sneakers. The kind of outfit you see everywhere. When she looked up and noticed me walking over, she smiled and waved like we already knew each other. So the first few minutes were fine. Just normal stuff. Sitting down, ordering food, talking about where we grew up, and all that boring first date stuff. Then she pulled out her phone and took a photo of me. At first, I thought maybe it was one of those quick accidental ones. People do that sometimes when they unlock their phone. But no, she aimed the camera right at me and tapped the screen. I remember laughing a little because it caught me off guard. She just lowered the phone and went right back to talking like nothing happened. It felt a little odd, but I did not say anything. Some people just like taking pictures. Then like 2 minutes later, she did it again. Same thing. Phone up, quick photo, phone back down. This time I asked about it. Not in a serious way, more like joking. She just kind of brushed it off with a casual answer and kept going with the conversation. It made it seem harmless. Like maybe she just liked documenting things. But it kept happening. Every few minutes, she would lift her phone and snap another picture. Sometimes when I was talking. Sometimes when I was drinking from my cup. Once when I was looking down at the fries. It started feeling less like random photos and more like she was collecting them. The strange part was she did not even look at them after taking them. Normally, people check the picture right away. She would just tap the screen, lower the phone, and keep talking like nothing happened. I started noticing other things too. Every time she picked up her phone, she would type something really quick before locking it again, like she was posting or sending something. I asked what she was doing, and she gave a vague answer again, something about sharing moments with friends. It still did not seem like a huge deal, just a little annoying. Food showed up, and we started eating. Burgers, fries, onion rings. The place was loud with people talking and cars going by. Nothing about the night felt tense or dangerous, but the photos kept coming. At one point, I counted 4 pictures within 10 minutes, and she was starting to change angles too. Some straight on, some from the side, one when I turned my head to look at the street. It almost felt like she was trying to get a full set of pictures of me. That thought stuck in my head, but I kept pushing it away because it sounded ridiculous. The date kept going. We talked about movies, cool, jobs, random stuff. She seemed normal, friendly, not awkward or quiet, just a regular person. But the phone never left the table. After about an hour, she said she needed to use the bathroom and took her phone with her. I stayed at the table finishing my drink and watching people walk by. Couples, families, a group of teenagers riding bikes past the restaurant. She was gone longer than I expected, probably 10 minutes. When she came back, she sat down and put her phone on the table again, screen facing up. She leaned back in her chair and started talking about something random again like nothing had happened. But this time her phone lit up. I did not mean to look. It just caught my eye. The notification showed part of a message from something called Find My Ex Group. At first I thought it was some kind of joke name. Then another notification popped up right under it. Someone asking if anyone recognized the guy in the pictures. My stomach dropped right away. I tried not to react. I kept looking at her while pretending I had not noticed anything. But my brain was going crazy trying to understand what I had just seen. Find my ex group. Recognize the guy in the pictures. That did not sound like something normal people do on a first date. Her phone lit up again. More notifications. Different names. Small profile pictures next to them. Curiosity got the better of me. When she looked down at her fries for a second, I glanced at the screen again. The phone had unlocked from one of the notifications, and I could see part of the app. It looked like a big group page. Tons of comments tacked under a post. At the top was a photo. One of the photos she had taken of me. It was the one from earlier where I was holding the burger. Under the picture was a short caption asking if anyone knew who this guy was and if anyone had dated him before. My heart started racing. I looked back up at her and suddenly the whole night felt different. Every photo, every time she typed something into her phone. She had been uploading pictures of me the entire time. Right there while I was sitting across from her. I tried to stay calm, but my brain kept going through worst-case thoughts. Maybe she thought I looked like someone else. Maybe she was checking if I had lied about something. But then another notification popped up. Someone had replied saying they thought they recognized me from another city. Another message asked if anyone knew my last name. More messages were coming in every few seconds. She picked up her phone and started scrolling through them. Her face looked focused, almost excited. That was the moment I realized this was not some casual joke group. She was seriously trying to find out things about me from strangers while sitting across from me. It made the whole date feel fake. Like I had been part of some investigation without knowing it. She kept reading comments and typing replies, not even pretending to pay attention to the conversation anymore. I started looking around the restaurant wondering how many people had already seen those photos. The group looked huge. Hundreds of comments were already there. Some people were zooming into the pictures. Others were guessing where the restaurant was based on the background. One person had even circled my face in one of the photos and reposted it in the comments. I suddenly felt exposed in a way I had never felt before. Like my face was being passed around the internet while I was still sitting at the same table where the photos were taken. Eventually, she noticed I was looking at her phone. She quickly tilted the screen away and locked it. But it was too late. I already knew. The rest of the date felt completely different after that. She tried going back to normal conversation, but it was impossible to ignore what was happening. Her phone kept lighting up with new messages from the group, every few seconds. Some of them were long paragraphs. Some were just quick questions. I kept wondering what they were saying about me, who these people were, and why she thought it was normal to post a stranger online during a first date. About 15 minutes later, she said she needed to leave soon. I was honestly relieved. We paid the bill and stood up from the table. The sky was already getting darker and the street lights had turned on along the river path. While we walked toward the parking lot, she pulled out her phone again and started scrolling. More notifications. She stopped walking for a second while reading something on the screen. Her expression changed a little. Not scared exactly. More like surprised. That made me nervous. I kept walking toward my car and she followed a few seconds later. Right before we split up, she looked at her phone one more time. Then she looked at me differently than she had all night. Not friendly anymore. More like she had just figured something out. We went our separate ways after that. I drove home thinking about that group the entire time. About all the strangers looking at my pictures and trying to figure out who I was. Later that night, curiosity got the better of me. I searched for the group online. It did not take long to find it. The page was massive, thousands of members. And right near the top of the feed was the post. My face. Multiple pictures from the restaurant. Hundreds of comments. People guessing my name. People asking where the photos were taken. People trying to match me with someone they once knew. I kept scrolling through the comments until I found the newest one. It was from the woman I had just been on the date with. She had updated the post saying she was still waiting to confirm some information, but things were starting to make sense. I closed the page after that. I never talked to her again. The moment I realized my entire date was basically a game to someone else was when a random guy walked up behind us holding a crumpled 20 and looking genuinely angry. But the weird part is the night actually started off feeling pretty normal. I almost canceled the date earlier that day. Nothing serious, just that typical lazy feeling where you would rather stay home and watch videos and go meet someone new. But I had already agreed to it 2 days earlier, and he seemed decent when we were messaging. So I showed up anyway. The place he suggested was a bowling alley on the edge of town that had neon lights everywhere and loud music playing even on weekdays. It was one of those places where teenagers hang out after school, and people bring dates because there is always something to do if the conversation gets awkward. I remember thinking it was actually a decent idea for a first date. When I walked in, I could smell pizza and those rental shoes they give you. The whole place had that weird mix of cleaning spray and old carpet. Lanes glowing under blue lights, screens flashing scores above every lane. He was already there waiting near the front desk. He looked normal enough. Dark hoodie, jeans, short hair. He waved when he saw me and walked over with a smile that seemed pretty relaxed. Nothing about him felt off at first. We grabbed bowling shoes and rented a lane toward the middle of the building. It was not super busy, but there were still groups of people scattered around. A couple families, some college kids, and 2 guys drinking beer at the lane next to ours. The first few minutes were actually fun. We set up our names on the screen and started playing. I was terrible at bowling, but that kind of made it easier to laugh about it. The first ball I threw barely knocked down 3 pins and rolled slowly like it was tired. He laughed and threw his turn right after. He was a lot better than me. Not professional or anything, but he clearly bowled before. I remember thinking the date was going better than I expected. We talked between turns. Basic stuff about work, where we grew up, random stories about school. Nothing too deep, but not awkward either. After a while, he went to grab drinks from the snack counter. Just soda and fries. When he came back, he seemed slightly distracted, like he kept glancing around the building every now and then. At the time, I thought maybe he was looking for friends or something. The game kept going. I was losing badly, but I did not really care. It was still fun throwing the ball and watching the pins explode when I actually hit them properly. About halfway through the game, I noticed something strange. Every time it was my turn, he would glance over his shoulder toward the entrance area of the bowling alley. Not every single time, but enough that I started noticing it. The first few times I ignored it. But then it kept happening. He would sit there waiting while I lined up my throw, then look back toward the front of the building like he was expecting someone. That was when I started feeling slightly confused. Still not worried, just confused. Then it happened. I had just finished a turn where I somehow knocked down almost all the pins except one. I turned around laughing about it while the machine reset the lane. That was when a guy walked straight up to him. The guy looked annoyed right away. Not the kind of annoyed you get when someone cuts you in line. More like someone who just lost money. He was holding a 20 in his hand and waving it slightly while talking to my date. I could not hear the exact words because the music was loud and bowling balls were crashing down lanes everywhere. But the body language was obvious. The guy was angry. My date stood up quickly and tried guiding him a few steps away from the lane like he did not want me hearing the conversation, which obviously made me want to know what was going on even more. I stayed where I was sitting but kept watching them. They were standing near the ball return machine now, arguing quietly but with a lot of gestures. The other guy kept pointing toward me while holding the $20 bill. That was the first moment I got a weird feeling. Why was he pointing at me? The argument kept going for about 30 seconds. I could tell the other guy was getting more irritated while my date kept shaking his head and trying to calm him down. Then the other guy stepped closer and shoved the money toward him, not handing it nicely, more like forcing it back into his hand. That was when I walked over because it was too awkward to just sit there pretending not to notice. As soon as I got closer, both of them went quiet. The angry guy looked at me, then back at my date, then laughed in this short, irritated way. He said something quickly before turning around and walking away toward the bar area. I did not catch every word, but I heard enough. Something about losing the bet, and something about 30 minutes. The moment he walked away, I looked at my date expecting some kind of explanation. He looked embarrassed, like someone who had just been caught doing something stupid. At first, he tried brushing it off, just saying it was a friend messing around. But the explanation did not make sense, because that guy clearly was not joking, and he clearly had just handed money back. So I asked more questions. After a few seconds of awkward silence, he finally admitted part of it. Earlier that evening, he had been at the bowling alley with a couple friends before I arrived. They were hanging out drinking beer at another lane. When he told them he was meeting someone for a first date there, they started making jokes about how long it would last. One of them bet that I would leave within 30 minutes. Another guessed an hour. Apparently, my date thought it was funny and agreed to the bet. They put money on it, $20 each. At first, I thought he was joking while explaining this, but the way he looked made it obvious he was serious. The angry guy who walked up earlier was one of the friends who had bet that I would leave quickly. Now that more than half the game was finished, he realized he had already lost the bet. That was why he was mad, because technically I had already stayed longer than his guess. So he had to give the money back. While I was standing there processing all of this, I suddenly remembered something else. All those times my date kept glancing toward the entrance earlier. He was not just randomly looking around. He was checking if his friends were watching, probably timing how long I stayed. The whole thing made my stomach drop a little, because suddenly the entire date felt fake. Like it was not just two people bowling and getting to know each other. It was a timer running in the background while people watched from somewhere in the building. I started looking around the bowling alley trying to spot the other friends. That was when I noticed two guys sitting at the bar area watching our lane. One of them raised his drink slightly when he noticed me looking. That confirmed it. They had been watching the whole time. I felt embarrassed in a way I had never felt on a date before. Not angry right away, just embarrassed. Like I had been part of some weird entertainment for strangers. My date kept apologizing and saying it was supposed to be harmless, just a dumb joke between friends. But the more he explained it, the worse it sounded. Because they were not just guessing how long the date would last. They were guessing how long before I would realize something was wrong and leave. That was literally the bet. Standing there next to the glowing bowling lane with the music blasting overhead, I suddenly felt like I had walked into the middle of some strange social experiment. The scoreboard above our lane still showed both our names flashing. The game was not even finished yet, but I did not want to stay another minute. I grabbed my jacket and walked toward the front desk to return the shoes. He followed behind me trying to explain more, but I barely listened. The whole drive home that night, I kept thinking about those guys sitting at the bar watching the lane, watching the clock, waiting to see when I would finally leave. And the weirdest part was realizing that if his friend had not walked over angry about the money, I probably would have stayed even longer without ever knowing about the bet. I knew something was wrong the moment I noticed the same guy walk past our table for the third time holding a camera that was definitely not a phone. At first, I convinced myself I was overthinking it. Restaurants get photographers sometimes. People film things for random projects all the time. That is what I kept telling myself while trying to focus on the date. But when three people suddenly walked straight up to our table and started recording me from two different angles, that was when the whole night stopped making sense. The worst part is the date itself had actually been going pretty well before that happened. I met her at a small restaurant downtown that was known for pasta and cheap drinks. The kind of place where the lights are dim, but not in a fancy way. More like they just never replaced the bulbs properly. Red booths along the wall, small wooden tables in the middle, music playing quietly from old speakers in the ceiling. I showed up a few minutes early and sat at the table we had reserved. She arrived maybe 5 minutes later wearing a black jacket and carrying a small purse. She smiled when she saw me and sat down like we already knew each other. The whole start of the night felt normal. No weird energy or awkward moment when you first meet someone from online. We ordered food pretty quickly, pasta for both of us, and drinks. The conversation started with the usual stuff people ask on first dates: where you grew up, what you do for work, what shows you are watching lately. Nothing about her seemed strange. Actually, the opposite. She seemed calm and relaxed in a way that made the whole date feel comfortable, like talking to someone you already met before instead of someone completely new. About 15 minutes into dinner, I noticed the first weird thing. A guy standing near the bar holding what looked like a camera rig. Not a normal handheld camera either. One of those setups with a small microphone attached on top. He was pointing it around the restaurant slowly like he was recording the room. I looked over for a second, but did not think too much about it. Restaurants sometimes film promotional stuff or social media clips. The night kept going. Our food came out and we started eating while talking about random things. Movies, school memories, stupid jobs we had when we were younger. She asked a lot of questions about my family and my friends. At the time, I thought she was just being interested in getting to know me. Looking back later, it felt more like she was collecting information. About 20 minutes after we started eating, I noticed the camera guy again. He walked past our table slowly. The camera was pointed in our direction for a few seconds before he kept moving. That made me slightly uncomfortable, but I still ignored it. Then it happened again 5 minutes later. Same guy. Same camera. This time he stopped near the kitchen entrance and turned toward the dining area. I could see the lens pointing across the tables. I remember joking about it with her at the time. Something about hoping we were not accidentally ending up in some random video. She just smiled and shrugged it off. Then we went back to eating. About halfway through the meal, things got weird fast. 3 people walked directly toward our table. One of them was the guy with the camera. Another person was holding what looked like a phone mounted on a stabilizer. The third person had a small microphone attached to a cable. Before I could even process what was happening, they started filming us, standing right next to the table, pointing cameras directly at my face. For a second, I thought it had to be some mistake. Maybe they thought we were someone else. I looked around the restaurant expecting a manager to come stop them or at least explain what was going on. But nobody did anything. People at other tables were just watching. Some even pulled out their phones like something interesting was happening. That was when I turned to look at my date, expecting her to be just as confused as I was. She was not. She looked completely calm. Not surprised. Not annoyed. Just calm. She set her fork down slowly and looked straight at me while the cameras kept recording. Then she explained what was happening. According to her, the entire night had been part of a social experiment about trust between strangers meeting for the first time. She had been working with a small research group that studied human behavior in real-life situations. The purpose of the experiment was to observe how people act on first dates when they do not know they are being watched. Everything from how they share personal information to how comfortable they become with someone new. Apparently, the restaurant had agreed to let them film a few controlled situations there during certain evenings, and I had unknowingly become one of the participants. The cameras were recording my reactions the entire time, even before I arrived. That was when my brain started replaying the whole night in a completely different way. The camera guy near the bar earlier. The way she asked specific questions about trust and relationships during dinner. Even the table location near the middle of the room where cameras could easily see us. None of it had been random. The worst part was realizing other people in the restaurant probably knew what was going on. Some of the customers looked like they were waiting for the reveal moment, like they had seen this kind of thing before. I felt my face getting hot while the cameras kept pointing at me. Not because I was embarrassed about the conversation we had earlier, but because the whole situation made me feel like a test subject. Like I had been placed inside some weird psychology project without knowing it. One of the camera people moved slightly closer to the table to get a better angle. Another one adjusted the microphone. Meanwhile, she kept explaining the project calmly like this was all perfectly normal. Apparently, they wanted to see if people reacted differently once they found out they had been part of the study. Whether they got angry, confused, or curious about the results. Hearing that made me realize something else. My reaction right now was also part of the experiment. Everything I did or said in that moment was being recorded for their research. I looked around the restaurant again. A few people were clearly watching the whole thing like it was entertainment. That made the whole situation feel even worse. I asked if they had permission to film me. She said they normally ask participants afterward if they are okay with the footage being used. If someone refuses, they delete the recording. But the way she said it made it sound like most people just agree. Probably because cameras are already in their face when they find out. I sat there for a few seconds trying to process everything. Half my pasta was still sitting on the plate in front of me. The drink I ordered earlier was still half full. The entire date that felt normal 20 minutes ago now felt staged. Like every question she asked had been planned in advance. Eventually, I stood up from the table. The camera followed me immediately. That was when I realized they were still filming even though the reveal was already done. Apparently, the leaving part was important too. I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair and walked toward the exit. Nobody tried to stop me. But the camera crew followed a few steps behind the whole way to the door. When I got outside into the cold air, the filming finally stopped. One of the crew members thanked me and said they would contact me later about consent forms and whether I wanted the footage deleted. I did not even answer. I just walked to my car and drove home. Later that night, I kept thinking about the entire dinner. Every question she asked. Every moment where I thought the conversation felt natural. And the strangest part was realizing that from the moment I sat down at that table, I was already part of their experiment. Even before I had any idea it was happening. I should have known something was off the second he walked in and immediately started scanning the restaurant like it was a battlefield. Not in a funny or playful way, but in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck raise before I even sat down. I had been looking forward to the date all week, the kind of anticipation where you pick out your outfit, check your reflection one last time, and hope that the conversation isn't going to be awkward. I never expected to feel tense before a single word was exchanged. He was polite enough, holding the door open, smiling, shaking my hand when we first met. Normal on the surface, which made the subtle oddities underneath even creepier. His eyes kept darting toward the entrance, the waitstaff, the patrons at other tables. Every few minutes he would shift in his chair and glance at every corner of the room, as if expecting someone to appear out of thin air. At first I tried to convince myself he was just naturally cautious, maybe a little anxious in social situations. But the way his gaze lingered, the slight stiffness in his shoulders, it did not feel like normal nervousness. We sat down in a booth tucked into a corner of the restaurant. It was a small Italian place with dim lights, tables crowded close enough that you could hear every conversation from surrounding booths. There was a soft hum of people eating and laughing, the faint clatter of dishes, the smell of garlic and fried food in the air. Perfectly normal environment. Perfectly normal date. But somehow with him scanning the room every 30 seconds, it felt like the walls were closing in. I tried to keep things light. Small talk about work, favorite movies, local restaurants. He smiled and nodded politely, asked questions, made occasional jokes. And I tried to laugh, to act like everything was normal. But the way he constantly looked over at his shoulder, the way his hand kept inching toward his jacket pocket, as if to make sure something was still there, I could not ignore it. After about 15 minutes, I asked him why he kept checking the room. I tried to say it casually, as if I was curious about someone's weird habit rather than confronting a serious problem. He leaned in close, voice dropping to a whisper that was almost urgent. He told me someone had been trying to kill him all week. And tonight, he said, tonight might be the night they tried again. The words hit like a bucket of cold water. My first instinct was to assume he was joking. Maybe a dramatic way to explain his jittery behavior, some dark humor that I had somehow missed in the messages we had exchanged. But there was nothing humorous in his expression. His eyes were wide, scanning, calculating, and desperate at the same time. The polite mask you wore when we first met fell away for a moment, and underneath was pure raw panic. I froze for a second, unsure what to say or do. My mind went through every scenario, every story I had ever heard about someone claiming they were being hunted or targeted. Part of me wanted to get up and leave, to tell him I could not sit here listening to this nonsense. But another part of me wanted to understand, to figure out if this was real. The adrenaline was buzzing through me. making my hands tingle and my stomach churn. He explained that he had noticed strange things all week. Unmarked cars outside his apartment, messages that seemed threatening but vague, and people who seemed to follow him on the street. He said he tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself it was paranoia, but things escalated. Today, he said, felt different. The sense of being watched, the feeling that someone was lying in wait somewhere, had been creeping up all day. I glanced around the restaurant, trying to spot anything unusual. People eating pasta and pizza, servers walking between tables, a couple celebrating a birthday. Nothing that would suggest immediate danger. And yet, with him whispering and scanning the room as if the walls themselves were alive, every shadow felt like it could hide a threat. Every movement made me flinch slightly. He kept checking the doors, the windows, the corners where the light was dim. Every few minutes he would adjust his position, leaning slightly forward or backward, making sure he could see as much of the room as possible. His fork trembled slightly in his hand as he tried to pick up food, as if holding something to eat was secondary to survival. The polite, calm demeanor he had shown when greeting me vanished entirely. I asked more questions, trying to keep my voice steady. How did you know someone was targeting him? Did he have any idea who it could be? He whispered answers that made everything more unnerving. Names he could not be sure of, people he had noticed lurking, moments that felt like coincidences but were too precise to ignore. The kind of details that made you wonder if he was being truthful or if he had fallen into a spiral of panic-induced fantasy. Meanwhile, I could feel my own pulse rising. Every clatter of a plate, every laugh from another table, every whisper between the staff made my chest tighten. I tried to act calm, to keep eating, but every instinct in my body screamed that something was off. Part of me kept thinking about the logistics. What would it even mean if someone were trying to kill him in this restaurant? How would they even manage it without drawing attention? And then another part of me realized that logic might not matter if he genuinely believed this was happening. Halfway through the dinner, I noticed him subtly shifting positions again. He would angle his chair to have a better view of the entrance and the back of the restaurant simultaneously. He kept his hands close to his lap, near the pockets of his jacket where I assumed he kept his phone. Every small movement seemed deliberate, like a practice routine designed to protect him from a threat I could not see. I tried to steer the conversation toward normal topics, hoping it would calm both of us. Movies, work, weekend plans. But every sentence I spoke seemed to be processed through the lens of danger. He nodded and replied politely, but I could see the tension radiating off him in sharp bursts, the way he flinched at sudden sounds, the way his eyes flicked toward the door even while he listened. The waiter came by a few times to check on us. Each time he glanced at them quickly, registering their presence but immediately scanning the room again as if deciding whether they were a threat. I started to feel trapped in his paranoia, a prisoner of the tension that seemed to coil tighter with each passing minute. Eventually, I could not ignore it anymore. I needed to understand the full scope of what he thought was happening. I asked if he had called the police, if he had anyone who could check on him, anyone who could intervene. He said he had thought about it, but he didn't want to risk alerting the person. That if he made a public scene, it could trigger them, and tonight might be the night they tried. That was when I realized just how much I had underestimated the intensity of the situation. This was no longer just an odd first date with a jittery guy. This was sitting across from someone who genuinely believed their life was in danger right now, while the world around us carried on as if nothing were happening. Every minute felt elongated. The food sat on the table, growing cold, as he continued to whisper updates about movements he noticed, cars he thought might be following, people he had seen watching him on the street earlier that week. My own mind raced, thinking of exit strategies, whether to call someone, whether to leave immediately. But the thought of doing so felt like it might provoke him or escalate the tension further. By the time we finished dinner, my nerves were completely frayed. My hands tingled from holding my fork too tightly. My stomach was a mess from the stress. And the entire restaurant felt like a stage, with me trapped in the center, watching him scan every shadow, every movement, every person as though the next instant could be his last. We left the restaurant together. I kept my distance, careful to match his pace while remaining aware of my own surroundings. Every parked car, every passerby, every small sound seemed magnified. He looked over his shoulder constantly, checking and rechecking, muttering low comments under his breath about patterns he had noticed earlier in the week. I could not shake the feeling that whatever he believed might be real, or at least, it felt real enough to him that it controlled his entire behavior and now mine. The drive home was quiet. Every red light, every turn, every stranger on the street felt like part of a larger game I did not understand. When I finally got home and shut the door behind me, the tension did not immediately leave. It lingered, heavy and oppressive, crawling into my mind. I thought about the restaurant, about how every normal detail, lights, smells, conversations, had been warped by his perception of danger. And I realized that some dates leave marks you cannot see on your skin, only in your thoughts. I thought the night was going well, really well. We had met at this little diner that smelled like syrup and fried chicken, the kind of place where the booths are cracked, but the pancakes are perfect. She had this laugh that made the whole place feel warmer, and the conversation flowed like we'd known each other for months, not just a few hours. I'd even let myself imagine a second date without overthinking it, which is rare for me. After dinner, she suggested we go back to her apartment. She said something about showing me a collection she'd been working on, and I didn't think twice. It sounded artsy, maybe creative, and honestly, I wanted to see her place. I had this image in my head of a cozy apartment with framed prints, a little clutter, maybe plants on the windowsill. Normal apartment vibes. I followed her through the streets, and the further we walked, the quieter the city became. Her building was small, tucked behind a coffee shop and a laundromat, the kind of place that doesn't have a lobby, just a door that opens to a stairwell. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling that twinge of unease you get when a place looks too empty, like it's waiting for you to notice something wrong. When she unlocked the door and led me inside, the first thing I saw made me freeze in place. The walls were completely covered. Hundreds of printed screenshots taped up in grids, stretching from floor to ceiling. I could see phone conversations with names I didn't recognize, fragments of text, some screenshots with dating apps, some with social media chats. Each one carefully printed, aligned, and pinned so nothing overlapped. The whole apartment smelled faintly of ink and paper, that chemical scent that reminds you of a printer that's been running nonstop for hours. My eyes moved slowly across the walls, trying to process. There was a pattern to it, some kind of organization, maybe by app or date. I noticed some conversations looked like they had been cut and pasted to highlight certain phrases. I felt like I had stumbled into a shrine, but not one for a celebrity or an artwork. This was something private, personal, and extremely unsettling. I had no idea what to say. I tried to keep my voice steady, but even in my own head it sounded hollow. She walked past me like this was completely normal, gesturing to some screenshots and explaining how she collected them over time, showing how each conversation represented an experiment in understanding people. At least that was what she said. Her tone was casual, like she was giving me a tour of a gallery. I nodded along, but inside my pulse was racing. Each step I took felt heavier than the last, like gravity had doubled. I tried to focus on a few individual conversations to make sense of it. Most were just ordinary messages, flirty, casual, funny, but the sheer volume, the way they were displayed, made it feel like I was being studied, like the walls themselves were watching me. I tried to find a place to sit, but the small couch in the living room was pressed right against a wall of screenshots, and every time I moved, I felt like I was brushing against the stories of other people's lives. She offered me a drink, and I took it, trying to act casual. Every time I glanced at the walls, I could see messages with words highlighted, some with emojis circled, like she had been picking them apart carefully before printing them. At one point, she walked over to a particular cluster and pulled out her phone. She started scrolling, comparing something on her device to what was on the wall. That's when I noticed my own name. Not in a conversation I'd had with her, but on a dating app screenshot, where someone had been chatting with her earlier. My profile picture was there, my age, a few lines from my bio. Seeing it like that made my stomach turn. It was like I had been marked before we even met. I wanted to laugh it off, to tell myself this was harmless obsession, but the intensity of it made my throat tight. Each wall was a timeline of different men, conversations she had captured and printed, all in one space. The apartment felt less like a living space and more like a museum of obsession, and somehow I had been added to it without knowing. She showed me more. Some walls had color-coded pins, maybe indicating responses or behavior patterns. Others had sticky notes with annotations, times of day, response speed, maybe even moods. I realized she had been analyzing people, collecting information meticulously, turning private moments into a public exhibit for herself. The thought that she had chosen to invite me here, to be confronted with her collection of other men and now me, was overwhelming. I tried to act normal, taking a small sip from my drink, nodding at her explanations, but I was acutely aware of every detail. The way her eyes lingered on me as if checking my reactions. The smell of ink in the air, the crumpled edges of some screenshots where I could tell they had been handled repeatedly. The faint scratches on the walls where she had pulled down old prints to replace them with new ones. I found myself walking closer to the door, trying to figure out an excuse to leave without making it obvious. Every step was deliberate, careful, because I didn't want to knock a single print off the walls and risk a confrontation. The sheer number of screenshots made the apartment feel like a trap. My instinct screamed that leaving had to be slow, precise, like navigating a minefield. She followed me at a distance, smiling softly, explaining something about her process. I wasn't paying attention. My mind was scanning exits, the stairwell, the street below, anything to get out safely. The longer I stayed, the more I realized how little personal space I had in that apartment. Every wall was filled, every flat surface crowded. There was no blank space, no place to rest my eyes, no corner that didn't feel observed. At some point, she stopped near a cluster in the corner, bent down, and adjusted a few pins. I couldn't look away. I realized she had organized them almost like a timeline, grouping conversations from the same person, tracing patterns over days, weeks, months. That level of dedication was unnerving. This wasn't casual, it wasn't harmless. It was methodical, obsessive, and clearly premeditated. I finally managed to make a move toward the door. I could feel her gaze following me as if measuring my discomfort, my curiosity, my reactions. Every step I took toward freedom felt slower than the last. The hallway to the stairs seemed longer than it should have been. I didn't stop until I reached the stairwell, the door, and finally stepped outside. The night air hit me like a shock. Cold, clear, and infinitely safe compared to the claustrophobic nightmare inside her apartment. I walked quickly down the steps, trying to shake the unease. The city felt loud again. Normal, nothing like the apartment that had swallowed me in hundreds of printed conversations. The diner earlier, our laughs over pancakes and coffee, the initial ease of our connection, all of it felt like it had been a lure into something much darker, a carefully curated illusion. By the time I got back to my own place, I felt drained. Not tired in the normal sense, but mentally exhausted, my brain buzzing from the exposure to the obsessive world she had created. I kept picturing the walls, the screenshots, the careful alignment, the highlighted phrases. I kept thinking about how easily I had been added to it without ever knowing. It stayed with me for days. Even now, I can picture the apartment in my mind as clearly as if I were standing there. The smell of printer ink, the overwhelming number of screens, the precise pins and annotations. I can't stop thinking about how normal she seemed when we met, how casual her movements were as she led me through a living nightmare. And the fact that she had selected me, had added me to the walls of her apartment even before I knew her, that is the part that really sticks. Not the act itself, not even the obsessive collection, but the calm, deliberate way she treated it like an art project. I thought a walk in the park would be relaxing. He had this calm, casual way about him during dinner, so when he suggested we keep moving instead of calling it a night, I figured it was just a romantic idea, walking under the streetlights, maybe stopping somewhere for ice cream. Nothing weird. It was already late, and the streets were quiet, but the park was still lightly lit, lanterns spaced far apart along the paths, and the faint hum of distant traffic gave me a sense of security. I wasn't expecting the tension that hit as soon as we stepped onto the gravel path. At first, he walked beside me like nothing was unusual, talking about trivial things, pointing out trees, a pond glinting under the moon, little observations that made it feel like a normal night. I was distracted enough to relax a little, laughing at some joke he made, thinking maybe he was just cautious earlier at dinner because he was shy. But then he stopped suddenly mid-step, and his entire body stiffened. He crouched slightly, lowering his voice, and told me to stay quiet. I froze, unsure if he was joking. The tone in his voice was serious, the kind that made your stomach twist immediately. He whispered that someone had been following him for months, and that he thought they were here now. Right there, in the park. I stopped breathing for a moment, scanning the shadows around us. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, leaves rustling softly. The lanterns cast pools of light with gaps of darkness in between. At first, I couldn't see anyone, and I kept thinking maybe this was a joke, some kind of thrill-seeker story he was trying to act out to impress me. But the way he crouched, his eyes scanning the distance constantly, the way his fingers tightened into fists, told me this was real to him. We moved slowly, him leading the way but pausing constantly. Every time a branch cracked underfoot, I jumped. Every rustle made my heart pound in my ears. He kept glancing over at his shoulder, calculating angles, checking paths we had already walked, and whispering warnings about staying quiet. It was impossible to laugh it off now. Every instinct screamed something was wrong. I started noticing small things. Footsteps behind us that weren't mine. Shadows moving where no one should be. The way the breeze carried sounds differently, like something was shifting just out of sight. He kept telling me not to react too quickly, not to turn my head sharply, just to stay close to him and follow his lead. His voice was steady, but underneath it, I could hear the strain, the constant alertness. The park felt enormous. The paths curved unpredictably, lanterns spaced unevenly, trees forming natural walls, hiding spaces where someone could easily be crouched, waiting. My phone was in my pocket, but I didn't want to reach for it. He had warned me once earlier that night not to make sudden movements. Every sense in me heightened, my ears picking up every distant sound, my eyes straining to distinguish harmless shadows from potential danger. At one point, we ducked behind a cluster of bushes near the pond. He crouched low and whispered that the person had been following him closely all week, showing up where he went, timing his movements, learning his routines. He said this was why he didn't want anyone to know where he was tonight. I realized then how carefully he had planned this walk. The path we were taking avoided major roads, avoided areas with cameras, minimized the chance of being seen by outsiders. He was living in a world of threat that I had never imagined. Every step after that was deliberate. We moved in silence, except for soft directions, small pauses where he would peer into the darkness, listening, watching, calculating. I could feel the tension pressing in on me from all sides, as if the trees themselves were leaning closer, waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, that someone, or something, was moving in the shadows, keeping pace. He explained how he had been stalked before, the previous encounters, the ways he tried to mislead whoever it was. This wasn't paranoia, he insisted. This was survival. And now, he said, tonight might escalate. The words made my stomach churn, and every instinct told me to leave, to run, but he was moving like a guide through a maze, and I couldn't risk getting separated. We circled a small clearing. He paused again, crouched low, and his hand brushed mine to signal silence. That's when I caught the first glimpse of movement behind a tree, a shadow too large to be a stray animal. He froze, shifting his weight slightly, and whispered to me to stay quiet and follow him slowly. My pulse was hammering in my ears. The hair on my arms was standing up. Every step felt measured, like treading carefully over broken glass. We continued, winding along paths I hadn't noticed on the map of the park I had studied earlier. He navigated corners with precision, always pausing, always scanning. At one point, I thought I saw someone standing at the edge of a lantern pool, a figure still, watching. But when I blinked, they were gone. He whispered that this had happened before, that they liked to appear briefly, make him doubt himself, and then vanish. By now, my arms and legs felt tense, my muscles tight from holding still for too long, from being constantly alert. The cool night air was sharp in my lungs. The moonlight flickered through the leaves, creating moving patterns that made the shadows even more confusing. Every sound, every movement was amplified, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me in a way that left me dizzy but alert. He kept talking quietly, explaining his precautions, the signs he had learned to recognize, the ways he tried to anticipate the stalker's movements. I noticed him checking the benches, the trash cans, the dark corners of the paths. Every object in the park suddenly felt like it could hide someone, and I was learning to see it all through his perspective, a lens of constant vigilance. We reached a small bridge over a narrow creek. He crouched low, whispering to me to look but not draw attention. Below the bridge, the water shimmered, reflecting the dim lanterns above. For a moment, I thought maybe the danger was gone, maybe we were safe, but he didn't move. His hand stayed lightly on my back, guiding me forward but holding me close. He whispered that sometimes they lurked nearby, waiting for moments of distraction. I realized that my first date had become a lesson in constant awareness, in reading small movements, and trusting instinct over reason. The park, which I had imagined as a romantic escape, was now a place of tension, each shadow and sound loaded with potential threat. My thoughts raced constantly, trying to reconcile the normalcy of the night with the intensity of this fear. Eventually, we made our way toward the exit. The streetlights on the road beyond the park felt like a relief, like stepping from one world into another. I could feel my muscles begin to relax slightly, though my heart was still pounding. He kept scanning until the last few steps out of the park, ensuring no one followed. Only when we were on the sidewalk, under normal streetlights of people passing by, did he finally seem to exhale. I realized that the entire night, the dinner, the walk, the careful movements through the park, had been dominated by his constant awareness of danger. Every action, every step, every pause was controlled by the presence of someone or something that had been hunting him for months. My date had become a survival exercise, and I had been an unwilling participant. Even after we parted ways, I couldn't shake the tension. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the darkened paths, the shadows shifting behind trees, the way he had moved me slowly and carefully. The night felt alive, like the park itself had been holding its breath with us, watching, waiting. I keep thinking about how normal it had all started. Dinner, conversation, jokes. And then walking into a situation that turned normal into terrifying in an instant. The way he lived his life with constant vigilance, the way he navigated danger as if it were second nature, and the way I was pulled into that world, even briefly, left a mark. The night started normal enough. I met her at this little Italian place that smelled like garlic and bread, the kind of spot where the lights are dim but warm, and the servers don't rush you. She smiled when she saw me, waved me over, and from that first second, I thought this was going to be just another fun first date. She had a way of talking that made you lean in without even realizing it, like she was pulling stories out of the air just for you. At first, it was the usual small talk. Jobs, hobbies, the kind of light stuff people throw out when they're testing each other. But then she started telling stories. Really good stories. Ones you imagine someone had spent years collecting in their memory, with details about travels, friends, even childhood stuff that seemed impossibly vivid. I hung on to every word, amazed that someone I had just met could be so captivating. But something felt off. A few minutes later, she told another story that directly contradicted the first one. At first, I laughed, thinking maybe I misheard. But the details were clear. The way she described people, places, events, totally inconsistent with what she'd said earlier. I tried to brush it off as nerves, or her adding color to keep me interested. But the pattern kept happening. Every story, every anecdote was slightly different, like she was adjusting as she went. I started noticing little things, tiny slips that made me question whether any of it was real. The way she changed minor details depending on what I said, the way she laughed differently when a story didn't match up, the way she seemed to be reading me constantly, gauging my reactions. I wasn't sure if it was playful or calculated. By the time the main course came, I realized the stories weren't just inconsistent. They were deliberate. She was creating versions of herself on the spot, shaping each anecdote to see how I'd react. I tried to test her, asking subtle questions about details she'd mentioned earlier, but she shifted effortlessly, moving from one persona to another without missing a beat. It was impressive and terrifying at the same time. I felt like I was in a house of mirrors. Every reflection was slightly different, and I couldn't tell which one was real. The more I paid attention, the more I noticed the changes. Accents, tones, minor preferences, even her gestures. Everything was fluid. Everything was designed. I wasn't meeting a person. I was meeting an experiment, a performance, a character she had built to see if I liked her. Halfway through dessert, she leaned back, smiling in a way that finally stopped me. She admitted it. She told me she created a new personality for every first date. Every story I had heard, every detail I had believed, was just a version she was testing to see which one people responded to best. She didn't just tell stories. She became someone else entirely on demand in real time for her own amusement or study. I couldn't breathe. My stomach dropped. All those laughs, all those moments where I thought I was connecting with someone were illusions. I had been interacting with a moving target, a person who existed for the express purpose of being consumed, judged, and discarded according to how I reacted. I had no idea who she was, and maybe she didn't even know. The lines between performance and identity had vanished entirely. We sat in silence for a moment after she told me. I tried to process what that meant. The excitement, the thrill, the magnetic pull I had felt. It was all constructed. I looked around the restaurant, suddenly aware of how small and intimate it felt, like it had been a stage all along, the tables and chairs just props in her performance. Every laugh, every word, every gesture had been crafted, tailored, tested. She watched me closely as I struggled to respond. There was a calmness about her, a confidence that made the revelation even worse. She seemed perfectly at ease with the fact that I was realizing I had been manipulated. It was like she thrived on the awareness, on the control, on the fact that I was seeing the truth. I couldn't stop thinking about the practical side of it either. How many people had sat across from her like I was, laughing at stories that weren't real, believing they were connecting with someone genuine? How many dinners, how many walks, how many shared coffees had been tests, experiments, performances? It made the world seem suddenly smaller, the lines between real and fake impossibly thin. I tried to imagine who she really was underneath all the masks. Did she even know? Did she have a true personality, or was she entirely composed of the fragments she showed to strangers? The thought that I might have been just another set of reactions, data collected and analyzed in her mind, made my skin crawl. Every gesture I made, every laugh, every nod, it was all being observed, logged, and perhaps discarded. When the check came, I was shaking slightly, though I tried not to show it. The restaurant had started to feel claustrophobic, like the walls were closing in with all the performed identities floating around in the air. I realized that what had seemed like charm, like effortless charisma, was a kind of predatory intelligence. Not malicious in the traditional sense, but unsettling in the way it erased any sense of authenticity. She continued talking, seamlessly slipping into a new story, a new persona, a new facet of herself as I sat frozen. I could feel my face tightening, my hands resting uncomfortably on the table, trying to appear calm while my mind spun with the implications. I realized that leaving would be awkward, confrontational even, but staying meant continuing to interact with someone whose entire being was a series of illusions. Finally, I stood up, thanked her quietly, and left. The night air outside hit me like a shock, crisp and real. For the first time, I felt safe, detached from the layers of performance and control. But even as I walked down the street, my mind kept replaying moments, trying to decipher which version I had been interacting with and whether any part of her had been real at all. I haven't seen her since. I keep thinking about her sometimes, wondering if she's on another first date tonight, performing a different version of herself, collecting reactions, testing personas. It's a haunting thought that someone could be so skilled at manipulating identity, at weaving different realities around strangers without them ever knowing. Even now, when I meet new people, I catch myself analyzing every word, every gesture, every story, wondering if I'm talking to a person or a performance. And part of me can't forget the calm way she admitted it, the way she smiled while telling me she wasn't real, at least not in any way I could recognize. It left a mark, a lingering unease that I can't shake, a reminder that sometimes the most captivating people aren't who they appear to be. They're exactly what they want you to see. I thought I had lucked out when I got the date. He had this charm that was effortless, the kind that makes you smile without realizing it, like he was calibrated to make everyone feel comfortable. We met at a rooftop bistro that overlooked the city, glass walls on three sides, so you could see all the lights stretching into the night. The air was cool, but there were heaters scattered around, soft music playing, people laughing at their own tables without being loud. I was early as usual, and he was already there when I arrived, leaning casually against the railing, looking like he had stepped out of a magazine. He smiled when he saw me, and I felt myself relaxing immediately. The waiter came to take our drinks, and he was charming and easy to talk to, telling small anecdotes, asking questions that seemed thoughtful but not rehearsed. We laughed, shared stories, and everything felt natural. I kept thinking how unusual it was to meet someone who was genuinely engaging without being overbearing. The food arrived, plates steaming, the aroma making the space feel even warmer. We were talking about travel, our jobs, funny little things from childhood, and I felt like we had been friends for months, not hours. He had this energy, this presence that drew people in, and I was completely captivated. That's when it happened. The waiter set down the dessert plates and, in passing, said his name aloud. But it wasn't his name. He called him something completely different. The word hung in the air, and for a second, I thought it was some kind of joke or maybe a nickname I hadn't heard before. But the expression on his face changed instantly, subtle but sharp, like a switch had been flipped. The warmth drained from the table, and suddenly there was silence, a heavy kind of quiet that made my stomach tighten. He didn't react immediately, just paused, smiled faintly, and reached for the dessert. But I noticed the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes flicked to the waiter with that unreadable look. The waiter froze too, realizing he had made a mistake, and the background chatter seemed to dim somehow. Other tables didn't notice, but it felt like the universe had contracted around our table. I could feel it in my chest, that sudden instinct that something was very, very wrong. He leaned back, still calm on the surface, but the way he moved now was careful, measured. The charm was still there, but it had a sharp edge. I tried to laugh it off, pretending not to notice, but inside I was panicking. Why would a wrong name make the air so heavy? It didn't make sense. People get called the wrong name all the time, and yet here, everything shifted. The waiter finally mumbled an apology, but he didn't accept it right away. Instead, he tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly, and I realized he was assessing the situation, weighing something invisible to me. For the next few minutes, everything felt off. He kept scanning the area subtly, just glancing at other tables, watching exits, small gestures that I didn't understand. The charm was gone now, replaced with this alertness, this calculation that made me realize how little I knew about him. The way he had interacted before felt like a performance, and suddenly the mask slipped. I was sitting across from someone I didn't recognize at all. I tried to engage him, to ask about the travel stories he had been telling, but even the details seemed different now. The previous warmth was replaced by a quiet intensity. Every sentence he spoke was deliberate, but there was an underlying tension, a sense that he was aware of things I wasn't. The waiter returned, and this time he didn't even glance at our table, clearly nervous, avoiding eye contact. The whole scene felt like a stage, and I had just realized I was watching a show I didn't audition for. I couldn't stop noticing tiny details. The way he positioned his hands, the way he adjusted his chair slightly, the way he observed shadows near the edges of the rooftop. I didn't understand it fully, but I could feel the danger, the unspoken warning in the way he moved. It was the predator assessing the terrain, calculating, keeping everything under control. I wanted to ask, to say something, but I didn't dare. My instincts told me to be quiet, to sit still, to follow his lead. The rest of the night unfolded in a strange, disorienting way. He returned to being charming on the surface, smiling, laughing at jokes, telling stories. But now every gesture, every laugh, every word felt layered, rehearsed in a different way. I couldn't tell if he was still being himself, or if he had switched into some kind of mode that I couldn't penetrate. The wrong name had unlocked something else entirely. The person I had met hours ago was gone, replaced with someone sharper, colder, hyper-aware. I noticed other people at the bistro looking in our direction, subtly but unmistakably. There was tension in the air, a sense that everyone somehow knew that something was off at our table. The waiter moved like he was on eggshells, giving us space, avoiding interaction. It felt surreal, like the restaurant itself was holding its breath. The music became background noise. Lights blurred slightly as I tried to keep my focus. As dessert ended, he asked me if I wanted to go for a walk. I said yes, though my mind was racing. The city below was a blur of lights, traffic moving lazily, pedestrians unaware of the drama that had just played out above. He led me down the fire escape and onto a quiet street. His movements were deliberate, precise, almost predatory. I realized then that the wrong name hadn't just been a mistake. It had been a test, an event that triggered a side of him I hadn't seen before. He explained nothing. He didn't need to. I could feel it in the way he moved, in the way he observed everything, in the way he kept us close to the walls, away from open spaces, always scanning. It was terrifying, but I couldn't look away. There was a logic to it, a rhythm that only he seemed to understand. I began to realize that everything charming, everything easy about him before was just a layer, a veneer that could vanish in an instant. And when it did, I could see the core of him, and it was sharp and controlled and impossible to ignore. We walked for what felt like hours, streets emptying as the night deepened. Every time someone passed us, I noticed him shift slightly, his gaze following them, hands adjusting subtly, posture changing with micro-efficiency. I couldn't stop thinking about the restaurant, about that sudden silence, about the wrong name that had unlocked this. How many layers had he hidden before? How many of those smiles, laughs, and stories were real, and how many were just part of the surface layer? By the time we returned to where our cars were parked, I was exhausted but too alert to relax. The city seemed different now, familiar streets feeling strange, as though I had seen the night from a completely new perspective. He leaned casually against his car, calm once again, smiling as though nothing had happened, the charming mask back in place. But I knew better. I had seen beneath it. I had felt the shark shift, the moment everything changed. When we said goodnight, I felt a mix of relief and unease. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, to tell myself I was imagining things, but I knew I wasn't. The wrong name had revealed something I couldn't unsee. Something precise, controlled, and terrifyingly aware. I drove home thinking about the silence at the table, the way the waiter had frozen, the tension that had swallowed the restaurant in seconds. Even now, I think about it sometimes, imagining other people meeting him, smiling, laughing, oblivious to the layers beneath. I can't forget that split second when everything changed, when a single word made the air thicken and showed me a side of someone I wasn't supposed to see. That's the kind of thing that sticks, the kind of date that you can't tell anyone about without sounding crazy, because it was just a dinner and a wrong name and a look that could freeze a room. I thought the evening was going to be casual, just dinner and maybe a walk afterward. She picked a small cafe tucked into a side street, the kind of place that had mismatched chairs and soft yellow lights that made everything look warm. The tables were spaced out, giving a sense of privacy, and there was a faint smell of fresh bread coming from the oven in the corner. I arrived a few minutes early and grabbed a window seat. She showed up right on time, smiling like she had stepped out of a magazine ad, effortless and approachable, carrying a tote bag that looked like she had thrown together her whole personality in it. We started with the usual small talk, questions about work, travel, favorite movies. She laughed easily, leaned in slightly when I told stories, made me feel like every word mattered. There was an easy rhythm to the conversation that made it feel like we had known each other for months. She suggested we play a little game, something to make things interesting, and I figured it was one of those harmless truth games people do at parties, just a way to keep the conversation flowing. I said okay, curious and willing to be spontaneous. She pulled a little notebook from her bag, scribbled a few lines in it as she explained the rules. The first question she asked made the air thicken immediately, though. She looked straight at me, a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes, and asked whether anyone would notice if I disappeared tonight. My stomach dropped, and suddenly I felt like the walls had moved closer, like the lights dimmed by a fraction I could see out of the corner of my eye. I laughed nervously, trying to make it seem like a joke, but I could tell she didn't see it that way. She was studying me, waiting for my reaction, eyes narrowing slightly, as if she were mapping out something invisible. I tried to deflect, made a joke about having friends who would notice, family who would freak out. She tilted her head, scribbled something in the notebook, and then leaned back in her chair with that same grin, the one that felt more like a predator's calculation than charm. The first question wasn't a one-off. It set the tone. Each new question was sharper and more invasive, probing deeper into my life, my routines, who I talked to, who I trusted. It was as though she got a map of my world and was tracing the lines with her pen while I was trapped on the page. I started noticing tiny details I hadn't paid attention to before. The way her bag was positioned, the angle of the chair, the subtle shifts in her posture when someone passed by the window. She was aware of everything. Every noise, every glance from the few other patrons. She noted it all without missing a beat. I couldn't help but notice the shadows of the cafe, how they seemed to bend toward our table, emphasizing her questions. It was claustrophobic, even though we were in a space that was physically open. By the third or fourth question, the notebook was practically an extension of her arm. She asked about my routines, where I usually spent my evenings, if I ever went to the park alone at night, if anyone checked in on me regularly. My pulse started to pick up, and I realized I had no way to gauge if I was just being paranoid or if she really knew more than a normal stranger should. The questions weren't just personal. They were precise. Too precise. It felt like she'd been studying me for a long time, learning patterns and habits that should have been private. I tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, talking about movies, the weather, anything to break the rhythm, but she would circle back, sliding in another question that made my stomach twist. She asked if anyone would notice if I didn't return from the park this week, if my neighbors would ask questions, if my friends would care. I felt sweat forming along my spine, a chill I couldn't shake. People talk about first date nerves, but this was something different. This was a deliberate, calculated probing into my existence. I glanced around the cafe, noticing for the first time how quiet it had become. Patrons were eating and chatting, but the normal buzz of the place felt distant, muted somehow. She was the center, and I was on the page, answering every question while trying to mask the panic creeping into my chest. I realized she wasn't just curious. She was gathering information, testing boundaries, mapping the edges of my life. The notebook wasn't a game anymore, it was a dossier, meticulously constructed in real time, and I was the subject. The evening stretched on, and each question made my pulse jump higher. She asked if anyone had ever looked for me unexpectedly, if I had habits that made me predictable, if I ever noticed strangers watching me. By now, I could barely respond without feeling like I was giving her too much, revealing too much, but she didn't push in a threatening way. It was subtle, clinical, almost like a doctor taking measurements without anesthesia. The more I answered, the more I realized the game wasn't about truth, it was about control. She was testing how much I would reveal, how compliant I would be, how easy it would be to map me like a blueprint. I considered leaving several times, but the cafe was crowded and night darkening outside. Every time I thought about getting out, she would glance at me, pen hovering over the page, a small, knowing smile curling the corner of her mouth. The silent command in her eyes was impossible to ignore. I felt trapped in a conversation that was no longer a conversation, but an experiment, an observation, a study of my vulnerabilities. At some point, I realized I was sweating despite the cool air, that my hands were tense, fingers flexing involuntarily. She continued asking questions, slowly narrowing the scope, moving from routines to emotional attachments, to people who would notice and care. Every answer felt like giving her another piece of myself, a silent offering that I didn't want to make. And yet, I couldn't stop. There was something about her presence, something magnetic and terrifying, that made me answer every question as if I had no choice. By the end of the evening, the notebook was full. The pages were crammed with notes, lines, small marks, almost like a map of my life that I hadn't agreed to draw. She closed it carefully, put it back in her bag, and smiled like nothing had happened, that this was just a fun game for a quiet night out. But the weight of what had just unfolded hung in the air, tangible and oppressive. I realized she hadn't just asked questions. She had learned my routines, my contacts, my patterns, the invisible threads that connected me to my world. She had dissected me under the guise of playfulness, and I had been complicit without realizing. When we left the cafe, the city outside felt sharper, edges more defined, lights glaring a little too brightly. Every passerby seemed like a potential observer, every street corner a possible blind spot in her invisible map. I wanted to laugh, to shake it off as a strange first date story, but I couldn't. I felt like a subject in a controlled experiment, and the experiment had ended leaving me altered, hyper-aware, paranoid in a way I wasn't before. As we walked to our separate rides, she waved casually, the charm restored, the predator mask gone, replaced with someone approachable and friendly once again. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and unease, knowing I had glimpsed something I wasn't meant to see. The notebook, the questions, the precision, it was all still there in my mind, a record of a night that should have been simple, but became something I couldn't shake. I drove home slowly, checking over my shoulder, noticing details I would normally ignore, aware of patterns and blind spots, thinking about who would notice if I disappeared, and knowing that she probably already knew the answer. The city was the same, streets filled with lights and cars and people, but the world felt different. I had been mapped, cataloged, measured, and there was no undoing it. That night, what was meant to be casual became a study of control, a first date that left me on high alert, questioning everything I had taken for granted. Even now, I replay it in my head, the notebook, the questions, the way she studied me with those small, piercing glances. I can't tell anyone without sounding paranoid, but it's burned into my mind. The game wasn't fun. The game wasn't innocent. It was a blueprint, a quiet observation of my life, and I was still trying to reconcile how close I had been to giving her everything without realizing it. The true theme was over, but the effect stayed, a lingering awareness that someone had measured me like a map and might still be following the lines they drew. We picked a small Italian place on the edge of downtown, one of those spots with checkered tablecloths, dim lights, and the faint smell of garlic that follows you out the door. I arrived early and got a table by the window, watching the street lights flicker on as the sun faded. She showed up with a casual wave and a grin, carrying a tote bag that looked too big for just a purse. I remember thinking how easy it was to relax around her, how her laughter filled the space without trying too hard. We ordered food, talked about movies, favorite places to travel, and by the time dessert came, I felt like I had known her longer than an hour. After paying, we decided to walk to the car since it was only a few blocks away. The night was cool but not cold, with a slight breeze rustling the few remaining leaves on the trees. We walked slowly, side by side, the usual chatter fading into comfortable silence. I didn't notice anything at first, just the sound of our shoes on the pavement, the occasional car passing, a hum of the city at night. She stayed close, occasionally brushing against my arm in a way that felt casual, friendly. Then a man appeared seemingly out of nowhere. He was in his 40s, wearing a dark coat and carrying a notebook tucked under one arm. His expression was serious but not angry, and when he walked up to us, he had that direct stare that makes you feel like you've been caught doing something you didn't even know you were doing. I froze for a second, unsure if I should step back or keep walking, but she didn't seem fazed. She kept walking, or at least that's what I thought until he spoke. He thanked me for helping with his investigation. I blinked, trying to place him, trying to figure out if this was some weird coincidence, some prank, or if I had accidentally done something that warranted a stranger's gratitude. Then he pointed directly at her. My heart sank. Suddenly, the pieces started to shift in my mind. The questions she had asked over dinner, the way she seemed to know too much about timing, places she asked if I visited, the subtle probing into routines I hadn't shared. Everything fell into a sinister pattern I hadn't recognized while it was happening. He explained that she had been the subject of his private detective investigation, and I had unknowingly assisted by agreeing to meet her, spending time in public spaces, giving her a plausible cover for her movements. The words hit me in waves. I realized all the little details I had ignored suddenly mattered. Her insistence on certain restaurants, her casual mentions of people I didn't know, her ability to maneuver the conversation in subtle directions, all of it now made sense. I had been part of someone else's plan without knowing it, and the truth of it sank like a stone in my stomach. I glanced at her then. She smiled, the same easy smile she had carried through dinner, but now it felt like a mask. Her eyes were calm, almost proud, like a scientist observing an experiment that had gone exactly as planned. I could see the traces of calculation behind her laughter, the careful precision in the way she had guided our evening. It wasn't charm, it was control, and I had been giving her exactly what she wanted without realizing it. The man explained a few more details, nothing that gave me the right to intervene, but enough to make my skin crawl. He had been tracking her movements for weeks, trying to verify suspicions, and my date had been perfectly performing the role she wanted. By meeting me in public, making conversation, and acting like an ordinary date, she had created a pattern that concealed her true intentions. I felt the weight of my unwitting participation pressing down, a mix of guilt, fear, and disbelief. I wanted to step back, to pull her aside and confront her, but there was something in her posture, the casual way she held herself, that made me hesitate. She didn't look like someone who would snap, but she also didn't need to. The control was in the knowledge she had accumulated and the precision with which she executed her plans. My presence, my willingness to engage, had been a part of that plan. I felt like I had just realized the room I had been in was a trap, a constructed scenario that she had designed to seem normal. We walked the rest of the block in silence. My mind kept replaying details I had overlooked. The way she asked about people I lived near, her questions about what streets I walked, the timing of our dinner, even the way she suggested we leave together. Every little action suddenly had purpose. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't casual. I had been drawn into her design, used as a tool in someone else's investigation, without either of us knowing the full consequences. The man from the sidewalk had disappeared by the time we reached the parking lot. I kept glancing back, half expecting him to be there, half expecting someone else, but there was only the empty street and the hum of the city. She leaned on the car casually, adjusting her bag, looking at me with that same calm, controlled expression. I felt like a character in a play I hadn't auditioned for, realizing too late that every line I had spoken had been written by someone else. As I unlocked the car, I tried to process what had just happened. My stomach churned, a mix of adrenaline and disbelief. I realized I didn't know her at all. The dinner, the conversation, the laughter, it had all been performance. I had been a supporting character in a show that I hadn't agreed to, and the revelation made the night feel surreal, almost dreamlike in its horror. I couldn't pinpoint when she had started orchestrating everything, or if the manipulation had begun the second she suggested dinner. She got into her car, giving me a polite smile, and I realized I didn't know how to feel. Relief that I hadn't done anything worse, fear at how precise and deliberate she had been, disbelief that I had been manipulated so easily. My hands were shaking slightly as I got into my own car. I wanted to leave to get as far away as possible, but part of me was trapped in the realization that the world looked different now. Ordinary streets, casual pedestrians, and familiar landmarks now carried a hidden layer of uncertainty. I could no longer trust appearances in the way I had. The drive home was quiet. I replayed every moment of the evening in my mind, noticing patterns, connections, and the precision with which she had navigated each interaction. Every detail I had missed earlier now seemed glaringly obvious. I felt like I had stepped into a story that had been written without my consent, and I was still inside the plot, trying to understand what had happened and how I had contributed to it without realizing. By the time I reached my apartment, I felt drained. Not physically, but mentally, as if my mind had been dissected and reassembled with subtle changes I hadn't agreed to. I parked, sat for a few minutes, and just stared at the streetlights reflecting off the asphalt. Even after the adrenaline faded, the unease lingered. I realized I couldn't share this story with friends without it sounding insane. I couldn't explain the meticulous control, the calculated questions, or the involvement in someone else's investigation without sounding paranoid. That night, I slept fitfully. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the dinner, the walk, the man on the street, and her calm smile. I thought about how easily she had manipulated the evening, how precise she had been, how unaware I had been until the very end. I realized the danger of appearances, the fragility of casual trust, and the way someone could use ordinary social interactions to create a controlled scenario without anyone noticing. Even now, weeks later, I can't fully shake it. Sometimes I walk down streets and notice the details, the timing of people passing, the way strangers look, small gestures that once seemed inconsequential. I think about how easily I could be part of someone else's plan again without realizing it, and the thought is exhausting. The first date that seemed normal, charming, and effortless became a night of revelation and subtle terror. I had unknowingly participated in an investigation, and even though the immediate danger was gone, the awareness of being observed and used lingers. That night changed the way I see casual interactions, the way I trust strangers, and even the way I view charm and politeness. The city hasn't changed, the people haven't changed, but I have. Every first date now carries a silent tension, a question lurking behind every smile, every casual gesture. The dinner was over, the walk was over, but the effect remained, a quiet, unsettling knowledge that ordinary encounters can hide extraordinary calculations, and I was left realizing just how unaware I had been. I'd never thought a first date could feel like stepping into a horror movie, not the kind with obvious jump scares, but the kind that makes every normal detail feel twisted once you realize what's happening. I met her at a small cafe near the river, one of those places with exposed brick walls, mismatched chairs, and the smell of espresso thick enough to choke on if you lean too close. She looked completely normal, jeans, a hoodie, sneakers, but her smile had this strange confidence, like she knew something I didn't. Right away, I felt comfortable, which in hindsight was the first trap. I'm not usually one to relax on a first date. I overthink everything, from what I wear to how I walk, but she had a way of making conversation flow so effortlessly, I didn't even notice I was letting my guard down. We talked about all the usual things, work, movies, favorite spots in the city, but she had this weird habit of circling back to tiny details about me that I hadn't shared. Not I mentioned my favorite coffee shop or my college, but stuff like the timing of my walks home from work, which I would normally assume was random conversation filler. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe she just guessed, or maybe she was good at reading people. After a while, she suggested taking a photo together. I remember thinking it was a little forward, but I agreed. We leaned in close at the edge of the cafe near a window. She held up her phone, and I forced a smile like everyone does in photos. The click sounded normal, and I didn't think anything of it. We went back to talking, finishing our drinks, making plans for a second date that now feels absurd to even remember. I left the cafe feeling light, happy, even stupidly excited. 10 minutes later, I was scrolling through social media because I had a few minutes before heading back home. That's when I saw it. The photo we had just taken was online, posted from an account I didn't recognize, and it had a caption that made my stomach drop. Last person to see me alive tonight. I froze. My fingers hovered over my phone, my brain refusing to process it at first. Then I noticed the account. It wasn't her, at least not obviously. It had a random profile picture, one of those faces that looked like stock photography, but slightly off, like the eyes didn't match the rest of the face. The post had been up for 5 minutes, maybe less, which meant it was posted almost immediately after the photo was taken. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I tried calling her, but the number didn't connect. I sent a text, nothing. My brain was racing, thinking through every possible scenario that could explain what I was seeing. Could it be a prank? A sick joke? Someone had to have hacked her phone, right? But even as I thought that, I realized it didn't make sense. The timing was too precise, the caption too pointed, too intentional. It wasn't random, it was personal. It was directed at her, and now terrifyingly at me. I ran back to the cafe to see if she was still there. Empty. The streets were quiet for a Friday night, the kind of quiet that makes every distant sound echo too loudly. I walked past the alley where she had told me she kept her bike, past the intersection we crossed together, and nothing. My heart was hammering, my thoughts jumbling. Every instinct in me was screaming that something was wrong, but I couldn't place what. Was she actually in danger? Or worse, was this some kind of warning meant to pull me into her world without realizing it? I started retracing the night in my head, the way she had casually noted my routines, the way she insisted on walking me out, the subtle nudges toward certain streets and corners. Everything that had felt normal now seemed like setup. I remembered the way her eyes lingered on me during the photo, just a fraction too long, as if assessing, analyzing. It all made sense in the most horrifying way. She wasn't just someone I met for coffee. She was orchestrating a narrative, and I had been written into it without knowing. I tried calling the cave, thinking maybe someone had seen her leave or noticed something, but the staff didn't know her. I explained as best I could, and they told me no one had been acting unusual, no disturbances, nothing. I hung up, feeling even more trapped, but the world outside was normal. But inside my head everything had shifted. The photo online was still there, the caption burning into my vision. Last person to see me alive tonight. I kept reading it over and over, trying to convince myself it was a joke, a stunt, anything but what it seemed. I went home, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went over every detail of the date, every moment, and realized how carefully it had all been constructed. The calf, the timing, the conversation, the photo, all elements designed to feel natural while serving a purpose I couldn't fully understand yet. I even remembered the way she laughed when I complimented her choice of drink, like she had expected it. The more I thought, the clearer it became that she had been manipulating the night like a director, and the post online was the first scene I wasn't supposed to see until it was too late. Hours passed. I kept checking the post, half hoping it would be gone, half hoping for some explanation. The account remained active, but no further posts. Still, the image haunted me. It wasn't just the caption. It was the way she looked at the camera, the slight tilt of her head, the calm in her eyes, as if she knew the chaos it would cause. I realized that this wasn't just a photo, it was a statement. It marked me as someone who had been present, complicit by proximity, even if I had no idea what she planned next. The next day, I tried reaching out through mutual friends, places she mentioned, even the social media tags from the photo, but nothing added up. It was like she had erased herself from existence in every practical sense, leaving only the photo and that caption behind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, her face, the phone in her hand, the words that seemed to promise danger, or at least hint at some unseen plan. I couldn't decide if she was gone for good, if someone had intervened, or if this was the beginning of something that hadn't fully revealed itself. Weeks later, I still think about that night. I avoid the areas near the cave, I changed my routine, and I deleted all traces of the post I could find, though it had spread to a few obscure forums and ghost accounts. Even knowing that I hadn't done anything wrong, I feel complicit, like my presence in that photo somehow tied me to the story she created. I realized the night wasn't just a date. It was a performance, a setup, and I was unknowingly a supporting actor in a narrative I never wanted to be part of. The strangest part is that life around me didn't change. People still laughed, drank coffee, and walked their dogs, but my perspective did. Ordinary social interactions, casual smiles, and random invitations became loaded with unease. Every time someone asked for a photo, a memory, or a casual gesture, I think back to her, that smile, that caption, and the way ordinary moments can be weaponized into something disturbing. I realized just how fragile trust is, how easy it is to be drawn into someone else's plan without realizing it, and how a single image can alter your perception of reality in ways you can't undo. Even now, months later, I occasionally see shadows of that night in random corners of the city. I don't know where she went, or if she's out there creating the next story, the next post, the next manipulated night for someone else. I keep my phone close, my social media muted, and my eyes wary of casual requests for photos. The date ended 10 minutes after the shutter clicked, but the ripple effect continues. That photo, that caption, the deliberate framing of the night, I live with it. I can't erase it, and I can't forget it. The world keeps moving, but I'm forever watching for signs, hoping that this was a one-time event, but fearing it was the beginning of something I'll never fully understand. I thought I was meeting a regular guy, the kind who seemed a little shy but harmless, the kind you might actually go out with twice before realizing he's a little too quiet. I met him at a small diner just off the highway, the kind of place with flickering neon signs and booths that have seen too many decades of meals and spilled coffee. He was already sitting at a corner table when I got there, fidgeting with a menu like it was a puzzle, and I remember thinking how unassuming he looked. That's what made it worse looking back, because danger rarely announces itself in plain packaging. He smiled when I sat down, and for the first 10 minutes, everything seemed normal, even pleasant. We ordered food, the usual small talk filling the gaps, what we did for work, what we like to do on weekends, dumb little things about favorite movies or local bars. He laughed softly at the things I said, and I felt that weird, immediate comfort you don't usually get on first dates. But then he leaned forward and said something that made me pause. I don't remember exactly how he phrased it because the moment itself was so jarring, I almost didn't process it. He asked me to sign a napkin. I froze. My first thought was that it was some quirky, weird collector thing, maybe something cute, like a joke or a keepsake. I laughed nervously and asked why. He tilted his head, looking a little embarrassed but also proud, and explained that he collected autographs from every woman who rejects him. That's when I realized this wasn't a quirky personality trait. It was a ritual, and I had just been invited to participate in it. The diner around us seemed suddenly too bright, the clinking of dishes too loud, the waitress too close, like the entire world had sharpened into focus so I could see what I was really dealing with. At first, I laughed it off, the kind of nervous, uncomfortable laugh that comes when your body knows something is wrong, but your brain is trying to rationalize it anyway. I thought maybe he was exaggerating, or it was some weird social experiment. But the way he opened his wallet and carefully laid out several folded napkins with neat, handwritten names on them told me he wasn't lying. Each one had a date scribbled in the corner, and each name was underlined or decorated like a trophy. The fact that he had kept them all, preserved them, and carried them around like precious objects made me realize I was seeing a side of someone that people usually hide until it's too late. I couldn't look away, and that's when panic started creeping in, crawling up my spine and making my hands sweat. I started to notice little things about him I hadn't before. The way he watched me when I wasn't speaking, the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his smile stayed just a fraction too long, too controlled. There was something obsessive in his calmness, something meticulous. It wasn't just that he collected the napkins. It was that he documented, preserved, and cataloged rejection like it was art. And now, by sitting there, by talking to him, I was being evaluated a file potentially added to that growing collection. I tried to think logically. Maybe he wasn't dangerous, I told myself. Maybe he was just a lonely guy with a weird habit. But the more I looked at the napkins, the more I realized he wasn't just lonely. He was deliberate. He had routines, methods, a system. Each napkin had details beyond just a name and a date. Some had little annotations, favorite color, hairstyle, a tiny note about what they had said when rejecting him. It was like he was cataloging personalities, creating a map of the women who had dismissed him. And I had been asked to sign, which meant I was either already a candidate or had passed some invisible test. I tried to redirect the conversation, talking about other things, trying to ignore the napkin, but he kept it in sight, sliding it closer, smiling softly, waiting. The diner felt smaller, more claustrophobic. I became aware of the other patrons, the fluorescent lights, the smell of fried food that suddenly felt suffocating. Time stretched out, and every second I spent looking at those napkins made me feel more trapped. It wasn't fear in the traditional sense yet. It was something quieter, more chilling. Recognition of being seen in a way that no one should ever see you, analyzed, preserved, and potentially used as a keepsake for someone else's obsession. I made a small excuse about needing to use the bathroom and left my half-eaten food behind. I needed space to think, to process, to figure out how to get out without provoking whatever side of him I had just glimpsed. Walking to the restroom, I could hear him call my name softly, almost politely, and it made my stomach turn. The sound of his voice, normally unassuming, had turned sinister without changing a single tone. I splashed water on my face and stared at my reflection, trying to convince myself I was overreacting, that maybe I was reading too much into a quirk, but deep down I knew I wasn't. I came back to the table smiling weakly and tried to steer the conversation toward mundane topics, work, movies, weather, but he kept glancing at the napkin, sliding it slightly closer again, waiting. There was no aggression in his movement, no raised voice, no threat, just patience and persistence. That combination was far worse than yelling or physical intimidation. It was calculated, almost predatory in its calmness. I realized then that he wasn't going to escalate outwardly. His control came from drawing you in, normalizing the absurd and disturbing, making you complicit just by staying present. I started thinking about the other women, the ones whose names filled those napkins. What had their dates looked like? How had the conversations unfolded? Was he always this charming at first, always this shy and polite until he revealed the collection? The thought that he had a method, a ritual, a catalog, made my stomach twist. I realized the napkin wasn't just about rejection. It was about control, about documenting the precise moment someone said no, the exact way they looked, the details that proved their decision. I was about to be part of it unless I acted. I excused myself again, this time more firmly, and left the diner. I walked briskly to my car, heart racing, eyes scanning the parking lot, and I felt the weight of every step, every glance back, as if he were watching, cataloging, noting my escape. When I got to my car, I saw him standing near the entrance, acting casual, like he hadn't been staring at me at all. I drove away, hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles hurt, replaying every detail, every gesture, every smile, trying to make sense of it. Even after I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling. I checked my social media, searched for his name, tried to see if he had posted anything, any trace of himself, but found nothing. No accounts, no pictures, no history. It was like he existed only in those moments, in that diner, in that collection of napkins, invisible everywhere else. I realized that he had crafted a world where he controlled everything, and I had been momentarily invited into it without realizing it. Weeks later, I still think about that night. I avoid small, quiet diners. I flinch whenever someone asks me for a signature or wants a photo. I remember the calmness in his eyes, the way he presented the napkin like a casual request, and the weight of knowing that he collected these moments like trophies. The entire concept of being politely rejected suddenly felt like a trap, a potential entry point into someone else's obsession. I can't forget it, and I know I never will. The napkin, those names, the careful handwriting, they haunt me quietly, persistently, like a shadow I can't outrun. I was running late because I got caught in that ridiculous Friday traffic that makes every lane feel like a parking lot. By the time I got to the little Italian place my date had picked, I was already tense and hungry, my stomach twisting in that impatient, irritated way it does when you know you should have eaten hours ago. He was already there, sitting at a corner table with a menu flipped open, pretending to read but glancing at the door every few seconds. There was something odd about the way he scanned the room, but at first I chalked it up to nerves. First dates make people twitchy. When I slid into the booth across from him, he smiled like nothing was off, all polite and easy, which made the tension in me loosen a little. He ordered for both of us without asking, some pasta dish and a salad, which I found mildly annoying but didn't say anything. We talked, The usual surface stuff: music, work, places we lived. He told stories about his life, made me laugh a few times. I remember thinking he was really charming, the kind of guy who could make you feel like the center of attention without trying too hard. I was already letting my guard down, imagining this might turn out okay, maybe even fun. Then it happened. Midway through my second bite, the door to the restaurant swung open like a scene from one of those movies where tension hangs in the air for too long. 3 uniformed police officers walked in and started moving straight toward our table. My stomach dropped so fast, it felt like it skipped a beat. My first thought was that this was some kind of mistake, or maybe he had been caught up in something minor, like an unpaid ticket or a mix-up. But when the nearest officer looked directly at him and nodded, I realized it wasn't going to be that simple. He leaned over and whispered calm, but with an edge that made my heart pound, that I shouldn't panic. They think he stole something. His voice was quiet, measured, almost casual, but the words hit me like a truck. Stole something. Here? In front of me? I felt my hands tighten around my fork, the metal digging into my fingers without me even noticing. I glanced around at the other diners, most of whom were staring, a few snapping pictures with phones, whispering to each other. It was surreal, like a scene unfolding in slow motion while I was trapped in it. He didn't look scared, not really. He just straightened his back, smoothing his hair like a normal person who happened to be about to get questioned by police in a crowded restaurant. I wanted to ask what he had taken, how serious this was, whether I should run, but my throat was dry and my voice wouldn't come. The officers reached the table, one standing directly in front of him, the others flanking either side, and I finally noticed a small panic in the way my date's hands were moving, subtle but there, a flicker beneath the calm. He kept talking quietly, gesturing slightly, trying to explain something, and I felt completely powerless, like I was in a horror movie where every move I made could tip the scales. It all happened slowly. The officer's eyes scanned him, then me, then the bag he had on the chair next to him. I wanted to say something, to explain that I had no idea what was going on, that I wasn't involved, but again my voice was frozen. My fingers fidgeted under the table, twisting a napkin, staring at the pattern like it could give me answers. He kept whispering, reassuring me that it was probably nothing serious, but his lips didn't touch my ear, and I could see his jaw tightening every few seconds, a tension that told me this had happened before, or that he knew exactly how to handle something like this. I noticed small details for the first time, the way he avoided the officer's eyes when they were on him, the way his fingers flexed around his fork, the slight twitch in his knee, the way he smirked just enough to look casual but not relaxed. It was terrifying because it made me realize he was used to this. He had a routine for being suspected, questioned, maybe even accused. And I had been unknowingly dragged into it, a witness, a silent partner, someone whose presence could complicate whatever story he was spinning. The officers asked him questions, quick ones at first, the kind you answer with one word or a nod, then longer, probing questions. He answered calmly, measured, polite. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and intrusive in my ears, as if the restaurant had gone silent except for the sound of my pulse. I wanted to stand up, leave, run, anything, but I was rooted to the seat, frozen by disbelief and terror. The other diners had stopped eating, some staring openly, others pretending not to look but obviously watching. I realized I was part of the show now, an audience to a dangerous performance I didn't know I had auditioned for. At some point, one of the officers asked me to identify myself, and I nodded quickly, my voice finally finding its way out in a small, quivering sound. I told him my name, explained that I didn't know what was happening, that I was just on a date. My date's hand brushed mine for a second, lightly, almost reassuringly, and I realized that part of him wasn't just trying to calm me, it was also controlling how I responded. He was leading the narrative, even with the police there, and I could see how practiced he was, how he had probably done this before, had rehearsed calmness under pressure. After what felt like an eternity, the officers seemed to lose interest. Maybe they found the explanation satisfactory. Maybe he had manipulated the situation well, but eventually they stepped back, muttering to each other and walking toward the door. The restaurant slowly exhaled, diners returning to food and conversation, pretending the incident had never happened. But I couldn't. I was frozen, my mind replaying every detail, every whisper, every calculated smile. We left shortly after, and I remember walking out into the night, the air suddenly too cold, too real. He kept talking softly, trying to explain what had happened, but I barely listened. I kept thinking about the fact that he had calmly faced police suspicion right in front of me, a complete stranger, and made it seem almost casual. I realized that the charm I had found attractive earlier was just a mask, a tool he used to navigate situations that would terrify most people. I had been along for the ride, unwillingly a spectator to someone else's dangerous ease. Even as I drove home, my hands still gripping the steering wheel tight enough to leave marks, I couldn't stop thinking about the diner, the police, the way he had whispered not to panic while the entire situation screamed danger. It was an intimacy of terror, the kind you don't get on purpose, where someone shows you the side of themselves that makes it impossible to feel safe again. The normality of food, of laughter, of first date chatter had been torn away to reveal something calculated, methodical, and terrifying beneath the surface. I haven't seen him again, and I don't know what he did that made the police come. Maybe it was petty, maybe it was serious, but I know now that charm can hide almost anything, and calmness under extreme pressure can be more frightening than anger. The memory of that night lingers every time I hear sirens, every time someone smiles at me too easily, and every time I wonder how little I actually know about the people I let close enough to sit across from me at a table. The diner exists in my mind now as a stage, the officers as actors, my date as the director of a chilling scene I'd never wanted to be in but couldn't escape. I had been looking forward to the date all week, mostly because it felt like a break from the usual chaos of my life. Work had been exhausting, my apartment was a mess, and I hadn't had a night out that felt normal in months. I convinced myself that going out with someone who seemed genuinely nice would be a good reset. He picked me up right on time, and the first impression was easy, friendly smile, casual jokes, that kind of effortless charm that makes you think you might actually like someone. We went to a small diner I had never been to before, the kind with vinyl booths and neon lights buzzing faintly overhead. The place smelled like fried food and coffee. It was half empty, which made it feel almost intimate. I remember thinking that it was the kind of place where you could get away from the rest of the world for a little while. He ordered for both of us, something simple, and we started talking. Conversation flowed at first, easy topics like music and TV shows, then movies we hated and vacation spots we wanted to see. I laughed at a lot of his stories, and I think he laughed at mine too. At some point, I started noticing little things. He kept glancing at the window at the street outside more than I thought was casual. Every time someone walked past the diner, he would look toward the glass like he expected something or someone to appear. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking he was just a little anxious or maybe had some bad habit of watching the street. But the more he kept doing it, the more uneasy I felt. After dinner, he suggested we take a walk before he drove me home. I agreed because it was a nice night and it felt good to stretch my legs after sitting for so long. We stepped out into the cool night air, the city street lit by uneven street lamps. There were cars passing, a few people walking dogs, and the usual background hum of city noise. He stayed close, his arm brushing mine sometimes, joking about nothing and everything, but I could feel the tension in him when he glanced over his shoulder, quick and sharp, like he was expecting someone to appear from the shadows. We walked a few blocks, talking about nothing serious, just laughing and walking. Then I noticed movement across the street, subtle but distinct. Someone was standing near a lamppost, holding their phone up and pointing it toward us. At first, I thought it was just a passerby, maybe someone taking a picture of the street or a car, but the way they were lingering, watching, and keeping the phone steady on us made my stomach drop. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but the hairs on my arms stood up. When we got back to the car, I pulled out my phone to check the time, and that's when I saw it. A notification from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. It was a photo of me and him, taken from across the street, probably from that lamppost where the person had been standing. I could see us mid-laugh, completely unaware of the camera, completely unaware that someone had been watching, waiting, documenting. I felt my chest tighten, my hands trembling slightly as I stared at the image. I looked at him, and for a moment I thought you would notice the change in my expression, the sudden edge in my tone when I asked who had sent the photo. He didn't say anything, just smiled, casual, like nothing was off. But my gut twisted, because the calmness felt wrong, too smooth, too rehearsed. I tried to laugh it off, tell myself it was probably a friend playing a joke, but the rational part of my brain knew it wasn't a joke. The angle, the distance, the way the photo captured us unawares, it wasn't playful. It was deliberate. We got in the car and he drove, quiet mostly, while I stared out the window. Every shadow on the sidewalk seemed alive, every movement across the street suspicious. I kept thinking about the lamppost, about the person who had been photographing us, and about how much time they had spent doing it. I realized that all those little glances he had given to the street earlier weren't just nervous habits. He had noticed it, probably expected it, maybe even invited it. And the realization made my chest tighten further, my fingers gripping the seat like I could physically hold on to control. When he parked outside my building, I fumbled with my bag, my hands shaking more than I wanted to admit. I didn't say much, just got out, trying to keep my movements calm, deliberate, unshaky. My phone buzzed again. Another photo, this time closer, just me getting out of the car, him still in the frame behind me. I froze, realizing that the entire evening, the way he had guided me, the way he had kept conversation light and easy, it had been framed. Not in the moment, but for someone else, someone who had been documenting us. I didn't look at him as I shut the car door. He just smiled, polite, like the night had been perfect, like nothing strange had happened at all. I walked toward my building, my phone in my hand, every shadow suddenly a threat, every passing car a potential observer. I could feel my pulse in my ears, every step feeling louder than it should. I kept looking back at the street, half expecting to see the figure with the phone still there, half expecting him to step out and explain, but nothing moved except the normal night. Inside my apartment, I locked the door, checked the windows, and sat down, my phone still in my hand. The notifications kept coming, photos from angles I didn't know were possible, some from across the street, some seemingly from higher vantage points, capturing moments of the night I had thought private. I didn't reply. I didn't try to call anyone, because there was nothing to say and nothing to do. I just stared at the images, the person or people who had taken them unknown, the date itself now a memory laced with fear instead of fun. I realized I didn't know him at all. The charming, easygoing guy who had made me laugh, who had seemed so safe, had been part of something I hadn't understood until that moment. Maybe he had known, maybe he hadn't, but the photos made me feel like everything had been observed, recorded, and I had been unwillingly participating. The quiet streets, the diner, the walk, it all suddenly had a layer of threat I couldn't erase. I spent the rest of the night scrolling through the photos, checking for details, for faces, for clues. Every reflection, every background movement, every subtle shadow in the photos made me feel exposed. By the time morning came, I hadn't slept, hadn't even closed my eyes. I realized that I would never forget that night, that first date, or the way someone had been watching, photographing, capturing moments that I had thought were private. I don't know who sent the photos, or why, or what their connection to him is. But I know that the way the night had unfolded, the easy conversation, the friendly gestures, the laughter was overlaid with a quiet, constant observation. I felt like a target, or maybe just a character in someone else's project, someone else's game. And that feeling hasn't left me. Every notification now makes me flinch. Every unfamiliar number triggers panic. I check over my shoulder when I walk outside. The city street feels too wide, too open, and I can't help thinking about cameras, phones, and the person who had followed us that night, recording moments that were supposed to belong only to us. The photos stopped coming eventually, at least for a while, but the memory remains. The first date, the diner, the walk, the car, the notifications, it all exists now in a state of hyper-awareness. I keep my phone close, my door is locked, my eyes scanning. I learned that charm and smiles can be a front, that people might be part of things you can't see, and that sometimes the danger isn't immediate. It's the quiet, unseen surveillance that leaves the deepest mark. I don't know if I'll ever go on another first date the same way. I don't think I can.